Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're coming to you live from the Heritage Foundation HQ, hanging out after the premiere of Police State, a Dinesh D'Souza film. It was it looked pretty amazing, the event and everything that's going on. So we'll be talking about that. But the big news right now is it's fairly cultural, but it has to do, of course, with Israel-Palestine. Ben Shapiro has just publicly told Candace Owens to quit the Daily Wire if she has a problem with taking money from them. And this is, it's resulted in them being, I guess, the biggest trend on Twitter right now. And it's going to get interesting because Mike Cernovich calls this constructive termination, which is a legal term. And, there's some talk about what this could lead to. There is a new episode of Tucker Carlson where Candace Owens has responded to Ben Shapiro's criticism of her, where Ben said she was being disgraceful over her position related to Israel and Palestine. So we're going to talk a lot about that. Plus, we've got news out of Atlanta relating to Antifa setting fire to a bunch of construction vehicles, 61 state racketeering charges, but that's the key there, state charges. And we're going to talk about what's going on in this country with the police state because, surprise, surprise, these are not federal charges. Before we get started, my friends, head over to castbrew.com and buy the best cup of coffee you've ever had. You can pick it up today. We've got our limited edition with Roberto Jr., our Halloween spoof edition, where we have our dead mascot Rooster, his foot emerging from the ground because I guess we're not being respectful to him. But if you want to support our cultural endeavors, which is physical coffee shop locations, this is the beginning of the project. I was tired of waiting around. The coffee shop is being built, and so we are currently selling the coffee. Pick up your Appalachian Nights, pick up your Rise with Roberto Jr., and your Stand Your Grounds. We got K-Cups, we got whole bean, we got ground, castbrew.com. But also, don't forget, go to timcast.com and watch Infringed, our latest documentary by Lauren Southern. Click Join Us, become a member. We are not having a members-only show tonight. In full transparency, it is going to be a brutal drive back to West Virginia from D.C., and it's just quite literally impossible for us to actually arrange that. So apologies on that end, but if you haven't already, become a member to watch Infringe. You don't want to miss it. Smash the like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show right now everywhere you can if you would like to support the work that we do. We got a couple of really great guests joining us. We have Dinesh D'Souza and Julie Kelly. Dinesh, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a writer, I'm a filmmaker, and of course the latest film, Police State. The website is policestatefilm.net. The film was in theaters, rave reviews, but now it's in streaming. It's also in DVD. You won't get it at Walmart or Amazon because they're not letting us sell it there, but you can go to policestatefilm.net and load up for Christmas.
Right on. Julie Kelly, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Julie Kelly, fellow Chicagoan, Tim Pool, even though he thinks I
He's
don't count.
I could hear it in your voice.
Even though he says I
Seamus
don't
is back
count
too, by the way.
because I'm from Naperville, and he did.
That's true. I yelled at her. I screamed. I said, ah!
Wait, where are you from?
Originally, I am actually from the same neighborhood as Tim, but we moved out of the city. I'm mostly from the suburbs. Like, I'm giving you a hard time. You want me to dox myself right now? I'm going to tell the whole world? I'm going to give my address? Want me to put it all on a silver platter for Antifa right now?
Can I guess?
Absolutely not. No, because that's just as bad.
Midway.
Okay. I know the neighborhood. That's not a suburb. Julie Kelly, declassified at Julie Kelly on Substack. Also, Real Clear Investigations.
You speak closer to the mic. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to get up right into that microphone.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
Okay. Is that good?
Yeah.
And I have a podcast with Liz Sheld, who is here, Happy Hour with Liz Sheld, and on Twitter a lot.
Right on. We got Phil and Hannah Claire hanging out.
Hello, I am Phil Labonte, very failed singer of All That Remains, anti-communist and counter-revolutionary.
Yeah, and I'm Hannah Claire Brimlow. I'm a writer for Timcast.com. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm really sad about this. Seamus is, in fact, back.
Thank you. You're such a good friend. Hey, Culture War kittens. I've missed you all so much. I'm happy to be back here for another show. Listen, my fans voted that's what they wanted to be called, so that's what I'm calling them. Yes, I do, believe it or not. Some people watch me, and it's not just because they hate me. Yeah. Yeah, believe it or not, but I'm glad to be back. I've missed all of you. I'm Seamus Coughlin. I am a political cartoonist and commentator. I have a YouTube channel called Freedom Tunes, where we upload a cartoon every single Thursday, lampooning current events, or sometimes just getting into culture war issues in a deeper way rather than touching on current events. Tomorrow's video is going to be very, very funny, in my humble opinion, and next week's video is going to be a Thanksgiving special that, let's just say, we're very excited for. So I want to ask you all to subscribe at Freedom Tunes, check our stuff out, hit the notification bell. We got some good stuff coming at you tomorrow and next week.
It will be Thanksgiving, not Friendsgiving, correct?
No, absolutely. We don't do the Friendsgiving thing. I'm not, because I don't have any. So that's why I don't do Fansgiving either, apparently.
Nice.
Yep.
Today, Seamus sent me a Bible verse telling me that women should stop talking.
So that's actually not what happened. That's not true.
Did he really do that?
She sent me something condescendingly saying that she could teach me a lesson, and so I sent her 1 Timothy
I did not.
2:12.
I was just trying
That's
to
all.
give some personal
not-
advice.
that's-
We have to get this show on the road.
I'm not particularly religious, but I kind of like the attitude. At least
I'll send it to you. It's charming.
Let's get into
I was
the
sending
first.
an out of context verse to be churlish with.
Seamus,
I'm gonna put it
you
on
are
Twitter.
acting very unprofessionally right
know.
now, and you've been emotionally unhinged for weeks. I know. So we've all had to put up with it. Okay, I'm kidding, by the way. I'm just reading Candace Owens' tweet.
I would have done an after show, by the way, just so you guys know. Tim was like, "It's going to be hard to drive back late." I said, "Let's do the after
I
show." I
told
want it.
everyone else to do it, and
I
everyone
want it.
looked at me
I
like
want
I
to
was
do
the
it bad.
devil.
I have
Yeah.
a dog that I have to
want it
take care of. She's going to be in the kennel for
How
like
about we
6
talk
hours.
about news, everybody?
Yes.
The
If
first
you want.
story that we got is a tweet from Ben Shapiro who says, Candace, if you feel that taking money from the Daily Wire somehow comes between you and God, by all means quit. And that is a bold response to Candace Owens' tweet, which is, my understanding, is a Bible verse, but Seamus might be better versed with this. Candace Owens tweeted, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." In response to this, Ben said, "By all means quit," to which Candace replied, You have been acting unprofessional and emotionally unhinged for weeks now, and we have all had to sit back and allow it, and have all tried to exercise exceeding understanding for your raw emotion, but you cross a certain line when you come for scripture and read yourself into it. I will not tolerate it. So needless to say, things are getting rather interesting. And if you're wondering why they're fighting, what this is all about, it has to do with Israel-Palestine. Recently, Ben Shapiro was seen on video saying that Candace Owens' faux sophistication was disgraceful as it pertained to what was going on. And Candace Owens has a video where she said that her point was simply, why are we so concerned about what's going on in Israel when our own universities are teaching children, young people, to demonize white people? Why are we spending so much money and energy on foreign countries when we should be securing our borders and helping the American people? And I'm like, yeah, I agree with Candace on that. For that, Candace tweets this, "Blessed are the peacemakers," which is to imply perhaps ceasefire. And that's what a lot of people are reading into it. Ben, of course, has just told her to quit. And now we've got, I think I actually have this tweet from Mike Cernovich. Let's see if I can pull this up. Mike Cernovich, well, we've got a couple, actually. Here's Tucker Carlson, and where's the Mike Cernovich one? Okay, I guess I might not have it. But Mike Cernovich said it was constructive termination, which is basically when you create a pressure in your company that is, so they're going to have to quit. A single instance can do this. Jack Posobiec says, Candace Owens compares Ben to a BLM activist who accuses someone of being racist if they don't support defunding the police. And Mike Cernovich said, he's become indistinguishable from a far left-wing identity politics woke psycho. He's working the soft cancel culture angle now. I didn't fire Candace, she quit. But he should also look up what constructive termination is. So let's just get into it. I don't know. This is the big story. How you guys doing?
Anybody?
I mean, why don't we have any fun drama? I don't understand.
Anybody that go like as far as like Cernovich's
Cernovich.
or Cernovich, whatever. His criticism. Anyone that touches on identity politics starts to sound like the people, whether they intend to or not, they're going to sound like they're diving into identity politics, whether it be, white people talking about their whiteness or whatever, or if you're complaining about white people and whiteness or whatever. Anytime you touch that, you can't help but sound like the people that are
like leftists.
Yeah, like you're leftists, like you're a victim, like you need some kind of special accommodation because people are offending you for talking about that. And it doesn't matter who does it. It doesn't matter whether it's a Jewish person, a white person, a black person. It doesn't matter. That's just the way you come off when you go into that area.
I got to issue what I wouldn't describe as a hard journalistic correction, but a failed, what's the right word? A failed insight on my part. I said the other day that Candace and Ben arguing over this stuff and having a kind of a public spat is just good for the Daily Wire. It's press attention, which is true. And that it probably wouldn't go beyond this. They're going to criticize each other. But now Ben's telling her to quit, which I don't know if you guys have legal expertise to some degree, but it seems to me that if you have a contract with someone and then you publicly say you should quit, you've just given them legal recourse to terminate their contract.
I think what's going on here is that Daily Wire is a fiefdom, and they like to have kind of a stable of people in their team, but who are completely under their thumb. Remember the Crowder business, which happened not that long ago. And I thought it was so odd because what would appear to be a private negotiation suddenly erupts into public. Well, why? Well, apparently what Crowder was kind of balking against was the idea of, quote, being owned by the Daily Wire, right? And I think this is what's going on here, is that Candace is a very independent spirit. She's actually got a pretty good ego. She wants to be her own person. And yet somehow she's corralled into the Daily Wire's stable, and they expect her to, quote, behave. And she doesn't really think she needs to. She's Candace.
She doesn't need to.
She doesn't need to.
Yeah.
And so I see this as a kind of, I mean, you could have had the philosophical debate without this acrimony. So it's very interesting that the two have become conflated.
But do you think Ben Shapiro could have had the philosophical debate without the emotion behind it? Because it's so much tied to his core identity and how he views the world. Maybe Candace could have, because she's a little bit more removed, but someone who's tied to the religious and ethnic groups that are involved, it's much harder.
Well, I think that is right. I mean, I do think that this is the make or break issue for Ben. I think it is the lens through which other issues are filtered. And also, even if you take a position that said something like, this is anti-Israel, but it's not necessarily anti-Semitism. Boom, you've like violated the taboo. You're like suddenly on the outs. So I think this is a case where in Daily Wire, a relative lockstep is being demanded. And Candace just won't play along with that. And so you've got this public spat.
And I assume this happens at all major media companies, right? I'm sure Fox has had the same issues as it's grown. There are some people who feel as though they can't question their boss on certain issues.
Well, I mean, the thing about it is, you want to be clear in advance about what you stand for. So if Daily Wire were basically say, listen, we want a variety of views, but kind of no variety on this one topic. This is kind of a bright line for us. Then you wouldn't join Daily Wire if you intended to step out of line. But it looks to me like what happened with Daily Wire was that they were like, let's get some really big personalities into our tent. And even the phrase that was used in the context of Crowder, wage slavery, which is kind of an old phrase out of Marx in the 19th century, that's what really rankled Crowder, because he's like, I'm not going to be your slave. You might pay me well, but nevertheless, I'm still my own man. And I think I hear the same echo here.
I gotta tell you, man. When the Crowder thing went down, I brought up how we had negotiations with the guys at the Daily Wire, and I think they're fantastic. The negotiations and the conversations that I had with co-CEO Jeremy Boring were probably the most refreshing business negotiations I've ever had in any circumstance, where I felt like he wasn't lying to me. And I respect that tremendously. I'm not kidding, man. When I've met with these big podcast companies back like several years ago, when I've met with big corporate news, they're blowing smoke up you get what I'm saying. I sit down with Jeremy, and it was like a real conversation about what's going on, what we could do, why we could do it. And you know what it ultimately came down to is I don't know that I could do a deal like this because I'm kind of a crazy guy, and I might want to buy a billboard that says, Liz Cheney is a fat pig or something like that. And they chuckled and they were like, fair point, And so I don't know if I mentioned that before. I think I did, because I was like, I would like to insult people like warmongers who I greatly despise. I do get a lot of people saying, no, they'll never come on your show, Tim. Don't you get it? And I'm like, well, I guess.
As if like Liz Cheney was going to come do Timcast and subject herself to a 2-hour interview where she was asked tough questions about the things she's been involved with. Like that was ever going to happen.
So, but ultimately it comes down to this. Like, I saw this outright when I sit down with them, and they're like, what are the potentials that we have? Because they're like, we love what you do. And then I was like, and I'm a fan of what the Daily Wire does, especially in the culture war. And then ultimately it came down to one simple question of, obviously, like, money plays a role, but Daily Wire is flush with cash. But the real issue is, look, man, I'm going to take my money and I'm going to do weird things with it. I'm going to do. I want a culture jam. I want to shock the system. I want to say things that are offensive. And they were like, fair point. Then we'll work on things, but we'll keep it professional. I said, cool.
I mean, whenever you're at an institution of any kind, you're subject to the institution, its investors, its donors. I mean, I've been at the American Enterprise Institute, the Hoover Institution. It always occurred to me that I have a measure of independence, because when you're in a think tank, basically they pay you to do whatever you want. Dinesh, write books, give speeches. And so I was like, this is the best gig ever. But I realized, well, how does AEI fund it? Well, they're funded by corporations. They're funded by a handful of big donors. You can't run athwart those guys, because then there's someone to complain to. And if you become a liability, they're going to offload you.
I do want to mention, because I see like super chats where they're saying, I'm with Candace on this one. I'm like, that's the beauty of the Daily Wire, though. They've got you choosing sides, the Daily Wire, the Daily Wire. Unless, of course, Candace does quit. And that would be, I think that would be like a nuclear bomb going off for the Daily Wire. If Candace actually leaves, I'm hoping that this is just like kind of a half-thought stunt of some sort. Like Candace really isn't that
like
angry
Will
about-
Smith. You think it's it's a variation of a Hollywood
Right.
production?
Yep, like who did Will Smith slap? Was it
Chris Rock.
Chris Rock.
Rock?
But then it turns out he wasn't even with his wife.
That's right.
Just came out and was like, we've been separated for 100 years.
Yeah.
That's so gross. That just makes the whole thing worse.
So much
I mean, I think this fight or this dispute online is going to be something progressive media outlets try and progressive media outlets try and capitalize on as, look, these right-wing enterprises are fracturing, they're falling apart, to direct from the fact that they also have a lot of issues.
The Israeli Palestine conflict is splitting both the left and the right and really making people pick sides. I imagine that Candace doesn't have a strong... I imagine it would make sense to think that Candace doesn't have as strong of an opinion as Ben, obviously, because Ben's got family in Israel, so...
But she's an American. She could have a strong opinion that America shouldn't spend money on foreign wars.
But I think Ben looks at the whole thing as beyond that.
Yeah.
We're living in a time, and this is not the way things used to be, but where institutions tend to be defined by one guy. Even if you go back to the old National Review, it was Bill Buckley. You have a lot of other guys around him, but like it's Buckley's magazine. Commentary was Norman Pudhortz's magazine. And, this is the Tim Pool operation.
It's a Seamus.
It's really more the Seamus operation. But not a lot of people know that.
Talk about it.
I got D'Souza Media. And so I think what happens at Daily Wire is it is Ben Shapiro, but then you've got these other guys who are kind of luminaries in their own right. And so now the issue is a little unclear. Who's the brand?
But it's really simple, actually. If you look at all of their personalities, they're homegrown. But Candace Owens was recruited. Candace Owens was already big, was already popular, was already moving politically, like influencing.
And Jordan Peterson, actually.
Well, right. Yeah. So, but like Knowles and Clavin, these are their homegrown personalities that they've built up. Matt Walsh, and they've done a tremendous job in getting attention and building influence for their hosts. But Michael Knowles worked for the company and then has now become one of the biggest social and political commentators.
Well, I kind of want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier, Dinesh. You said that the Daily Wire grabs different people so that they can have a large tent, reach a broad audience, and have a lot of different influencers. I think that's true. And I think, interestingly enough, that's actually symbolic of a broader issue with the conservative movement, which is we've tried to welcome everybody into the tent, and we actually don't have principles or know how to define ourselves anymore as a result of that. So when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict, obviously that's something where I think there can be diversity of opinion, but there are so many social issues like abortion, homosexuality, LGBTQ issues more broadly speaking, where the right doesn't even know what it believes because we've expanded the tent out to everybody who the left has said they don't like. And so we've actually allowed our enemies to decide what our movement is.
I don't disagree with that, but I think generally American culture is very ambiguous. We don't have a defined cultural identity that people theoretically could assimilate to. So it becomes difficult to say where any lines are, and then you add policy on top of that.
You don't think America had like a broad overarching culture?
I think we could, and we did at one point, but I think as it stands right now, Americans are very resistant to cultivating American culture. I mean, think about everyone who was like, if Trump gets elected, I will move to Canada. Like, there's all kinds of resistance to being American. If that's how our young people feel, then we have failed as a culture to maintain a cultural identity.
Young people in the United States, a lot of the people that I end up working with when I'm like touring and stuff like that, younger people really they want to avoid the nationalist idea, and that comes...
Or just patriotism.
Well, that's what they see patriotism as nationalism. They see American flags and they're turned off by it. And some people that I'm really, really close to and that I have a really great relationship with, they don't see a love of country as something that's important. They think of themselves as global. And I do understand that that's a little bit more of that is probably because of the people that I'm around. They travel around the world. They're playing concerts and performing in places all over the world. So that does make people feel less connected to an individual place. But it is something that is true among younger people in the United States. And I think that it's partially because we have between the Gen X and possibly the millennials, they didn't instill a pride in young people, and they didn't really, civics was taken out of school and stuff, and people don't understand why America is special and what about our government system is special and why it should be preserved.
And you add to that the younger generations, the millennial generation, my generation, and Gen Z and Gen Alpha are growing up in a world where everything is being handed to you. And I don't mean everything, but your bare necessities. Now, I get it. Expanding beyond that is becoming increasingly difficult. Owning a home is becoming increasingly difficult. But when your whole life is playing with your friends, going to school, coming home and eating Rice Krispie squares or whatever and Tang from your mom, and it's not having to chop wood, otherwise you freeze to death in the winter, we are building multiple generations of people who don't know what it takes to survive. And that breeds entitlement and resentment, and without any sense of community, that's Antifa, it's chaos, it's the far left, it's the woke cult.
Well, I think we've also manufactured quite a lot of cynicism, some intentionally and some otherwise. So just to speak to my own experience, people in my generation can probably relate to this. I was 6 when 9/11 happened, and immediately there were just American flags everywhere. Everyone was talking about patriotism and coming together as a country. And then what that was used for was basically to push for these wars that basically everybody now looks back on and says, we're bad for the country. So for a lot of people in my demographic, their first introduction to patriotism and to love of country was abused in such a way to give handouts to the industrial military complex and do things that ultimately were not good for the country. So people are less willing to come on board with common projects that actually are good for the nation.
That's not new. I mean, young people being disillusioned with America and the flag and not being patriotic, it's not really that new. I mean, we're Gen Xers, and we were raised in the 80s, and we had Ronald Reagan, and I think we were raised in a certain era of greater patriotism. But there still was a big contingent who thought that Ronald Reagan was more evil than the Soviet Union. I mean, they really did. So this is,
I'm not
it has to be put in context.
Hold on, I just want to make downhill,
Well, it's not.
Well, because, and I think academia is, Dinesh D'Souza wrote the book on it, A Liberal Education, was one of the first books that opened my eyes about what they're indoctrinating kids with. And now when you have your own children in college, you really see it. But I do think things need to be put in context a little, because what they said about Trump, they said about Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
There was a brief window where George
happened?
W. Bush was a hero, and then all of a sudden, he's the next Hitler.
We had the Vietnam War, and there was a massive young people's revolt against that. And then Reagan came along, and Reagan found a middle ground that has suddenly somehow been lost. The middle ground was called the Reagan Doctrine. So the Reagan Doctrine is that people must fight for their own freedom. We don't fight for them. It's their country, they fight. We help. So the classic model of this was the Soviets invade Afghanistan. They occupied with 100,000 troops. There are all these Afghan mujahideen who want to fight back. Reagan's like, I'm not sending a single soldier, but I'll send some CIA advisors. I'll give you some Stinger rockets to shoot down some Soviet helicopters. And the beauty of this was that it allowed that kind of libertarian desire to have freedom spread worldwide, but without a kind of costly deployment and extended deployment of troops. And then once the Iraq War came along, we went to preemptive war. We went to, what did those guys have to do with 9/11? We went to the idiotic, where did that come out of a store? Like if you break it, you own it. What? If you get rid of a dictator of a country, you now have the job of rebuilding the country. What? So all this kind of madness. This is almost like neoconservatism gone berserk. But Reagan was never on board with any of this.
I want to jump to this story from the SF Chronicle. David DePape describes far-right conspiracies that led him to Pelosi House. That's right. This is the guy who attacked Paul Pelosi, and he testified the other day. These stories went wild. He was claiming that he wanted to get Nancy Pelosi to confess on camera while he wore a unicorn costume, and then he wanted Biden to pardon her for these crimes, which is all around. The dude's clearly unwell. But who do you think they're blaming for all of this? In all of these new comment sections and on leftist Twitter and all these chats.
That sounds like something Ian would say. The unicorn costume, and then get the president to
I want to say that this is a guy who wanted Joe Biden to pardon Nancy Pelosi. Let me read the story. They say David DePape, the man accused of attacking Paul Pelosi with a hammer in San Francisco last year, testified in his federal trial Tuesday, offering the most detailed glimpse to date into the motivations and conspiracies that drove him to embark on what he said he and his lawyers described as a mission to fix a world corrupted by Democrats. Under questioning from his own attorney, DePape sketched the contours of his worldview and his political leanings, both of which were heavily informed by conservative media personalities and podcasters. David DePape testified that he subscribed to a number of baseless and wildly discredited conspiracy theories, many of which revolved around assertions of cabals of high-ranking public officials and celebrities harming children. Yada yada, he says he used to be left-wing, and I wonder if the Chronicle actually removed the references, but...
to a Serge.
Yeah, I think they may have taken it out. Maybe they were scared that we were going to sue him. Did I make the cut? Okay, here we go. I'm sorry. Here it is. We're here. He turned instead to conservative commentators Tim Pool and James Lindsay, DePape said. He also went on to mention many others. He mentioned Glenn Beck and other channels, but I just want to shout out, depending on which news outlet you read, they'll choose selectively which person he claimed to have been listening to. And Tim Pool and James Lindsay. And I am offended by this because, as Phil pointed out, the demanding Joe Biden pardon the Democrats.
Yeah, that's all Ian.
That's all Ian. Ian, what are you doing? You get me in trouble over here.
As soon as I heard this, I was like, he didn't pay attention to anything Tim said. That's all Ian Crossland did.
Famous far-right commenter Ian Crossland.
The same thing happened to me, though. They gave one of my quotes to Ian. They get all of his quotes screwed up.
Yeah, who was it? Media Matters, who claimed that your quote was Ian?
I think it was Gawker, and I was talking about how horribly destructive no-fault divorce is, and they said Ian Crossland said it. It's like that's not. It was like clearly something I would say, and they're like Ian Crossland said.
But they don't watch the show enough, right? Yeah. They don't know who any of you guys are.
So this is a guy who committed a horrible attack, on Paul Pelosi. These things shouldn't happen. They need better security. And they're claiming, he was watching, my show or whatever. And I saw this story and I thought it was funny. Media Matters quoted me the last time when the guy in Texas posted 4 clips from IRL. And the quote is, Tim Pool says, "I think it's funny and I just don't care," or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, dude, look, there will not be a single person who can ever get me to care that some dude who did some bad thing watched my show. We get millions upon millions. That's insane. The idea that James, first of all, I want to shout out conservative commentator James Lindsay. Which is laughable.
What's up, Jim?
What's up, Jim? Yeah, and but one thing I really love about Ian Crossland, who's not here unfortunately tonight, the thing that's great about him is he's a weird guy. He doesn't fit in any political box. His opinions are wild. He's for the death penalty. He's like very much for it. We had this big conversation where he was like, "What do we got to get? Got to have the death penalty for these people." And I'm like, "Whoa!" But then he's like, "But we got to pardon all Hillary Clinton." And I'm just like, "He's kind of wild." But he helps break the machine, because when Gawker takes a quote from Seamus and applies it to Ian, or when Hassan Piker claims Ian is a conservative, it shows you that their arguments are meaningless, completely empty.
I don't think we should take this at face value. Julie, of course, has been following the January 6th trials, and Julie, that there are many cases where, at the coaching of attorneys, the guy who had one motive is coached into a different storyline that is made palatable for the media, palatable for the jury, palatable for the judge to show compassion. So what I see here is a leftist who has now realized that moving right and claiming to be under the right-wing spell will suddenly get him a lot of sympathetic attention.
Lower sentencing.
The conservatives drove him crazy.
Well, and this guy is an illegal immigrant from Canada who voted for the Green Party.
This is why they had to construct the narrative, and that's why they needed a migration, because they know he started left. They had to account for that.
Probably still is.
And probably still is.
This proves it. It's just one big conspiracy against me. I'm the victim here.
You are the center of the universe, Tim Pool.
I'm the victim because I'm the
last paragraph they're talking about Gail Rubin. At the very end, it says, talking about particularly on pedophilia and sexual relationships have been misconstrued. Nothing that Gail Rubin, that James Lindsay has said about Gail Rubin's writings, none of it has been misconstrued. It is all word for word stuff that she has written in her books.
And let me drive it home. I don't know about where this guy gets his ideas or anything like that. I will say it's certainly not a Tim Pool idea to pardon corrupt politicians. But they bring up Gail Rubin in this. Why? She has nothing to do with the Pelosi's. This man going to the Pelosi's house and wanting to attack or harm Pelosi has nothing to do with James Lindsay or Gail Rubin. It does seem like what you said, Dinesh, that hey, look, I bet his defense attorneys said, here's what you're going to do. You're in San Francisco. This is the jury. You got to claim it's the right wing that radicalized you. Attack James Lindsay, Glenn Beck, Tim Pool, and there's a few others they mention. And then you'll get lesser charges. They'll use that to weave a narrative.
I mean, Julie, hasn't this exactly been the January 6th?
Yes.
Not in some cases, where the court-appointed attorneys have lured the defendants into this kind of whole therapeutic, I used to be a Trumpster. I've now realized that he deceived me.
Yep.
I mean,
That's what Jenna Ellis said, right? If I had known when she said that she was going to plead guilty in Georgia, she said, if I had known what I know now, I would never have acted that way. I mean, it's like renounce everything you've ever done and throw yourself on the mercy of these completely biased juries.
It's a struggle
sir,
session.
we're having a conversation right now.
They do have struggle sessions still ongoing. And you had a public defender, Heather Shaner, who's represented several January 6th defendants. And she actually gives them a list of books and movies to read to forgive themselves for their white privilege. And then they will go to the judge and they'll write an apology letter, or they will tell the judge in a letter or verbally, I didn't realize how racist and anti-Semitic, and we killed all the Native Americans, and so these are the sort of
female
public defenders that represent.
In my
it's the same thing.
my own campaign finance case, think about this. I give money to Wendy Long, who's running, college friend of mine, and the judge. This is the part I want to focus on as part of my sentence: psychiatric counseling, as if my behavior is so inexplicable. It demands psychiatric therapy. But see, I think what they were getting at is, had I gone through the psychological counseling 8 months, and had I come out and sort of seen the light, and I realized I'm actually now a leftist, and I'm now applying for like a job on MSNBC, I would have been declared cured.
Wouldn't that be hilarious if you actually did that? Just to troll the system, if you're like, no, yeah, I'm a leftist, and got a job on MSNBC, and then their highest rated host was someone who was re-educated into being a leftist.
Here's a point that I want to make about this case that I think everyone needs to ask themselves. As Dinesh pointed out, and as mentioned, Julie Kelly, in your work, January 6ers are given this narrative. Why would a criminal defendant go on the stand for several hours and explain that the crime he committed was actually part of a much, much larger conspiracy, and that he actually was attempting several more crimes? For what purpose would this defendant be advantaged by admitting to further criminal conspiracy on the stand?
I mean, he's obviously theoretically going to help the state with something. There's no way that he's counseled to do that unless they potentially could throw someone else under the bus. My point is,
there's no legitimate legal circumstance where they're like, go up there and admit to doing more crimes. Admit to wanting to do more crimes. Unless the narrative was, how can we rope in right-wing conspiracy stuff? So you have a guy who attacked Paul Pelosi, and that's the story. He was a leftist. He was a Green Party guy. He was Canadian. They want to weave this into a story about the far right. But how do you? He attacked Paul Pelosi. Well, of course, the Pelosi's are there. So then he has to go on and say, well, Newsom and Gail Rubin were targets too. So you're admitting to wanting to do more crimes to create the narrative.
That's right.
Yeah, my guess is this guy is out of his mind, and they realize that they could now move him like a puppet in whatever direction they wanted to. And so they've constructed a narrative.
I think it might be simple enough that his defense came to him and said, look, you're in San Francisco. It is as blue can be.
Yep.
You attacked the leader of the Democratic Party's husband. You need to shift this politically. And this is a scary thing for what's happening in this country.
Well, keep in mind, too, excuse me, Tim, but the U.S. Capitol Police, the same organization that allowed the Capitol to be left unsecured on January 6th, they were monitoring the Pelosi's property in real time. Mm-hmm. So they've expanded their offices out of Washington, they shouldn't, to parts of Florida and California. So they were monitoring, and they said, oh, we just looked away and whatever. Then all of a sudden this guy bursts into the house, breaks into the house. So it's also part of, to your point, you're right, but also covering up, again, another agency that really should be disbanded. Congress shouldn't have their own police force. Not only are they not protecting in this case, but they're totally incompetent, should be disbanded, and they're once again trying to cover up what they did wrong.
We had a legal issue a year or so ago. So I call my lawyer. and I say, hey, we've got this legal dispute, civil, not criminal, and a civil tort of some sort. And he said, okay, well, if we sue in California, we lose instantly. If we sue in New York, we lose instantly because these were big media corporations that we were looking at. And he goes, so obviously we're going to try and do it in West Virginia, which means we need to figure out why we have standing to be in West Virginia to do it. And I laughed and I was like, I totally get it. And he goes, look, man, you get a judge in New York and they're going to be corporate and they're going to be Democrats and they instantly hate you no matter what you say because you're Tim Pool. You go to West Virginia and they're probably going to instantly like you. I got to be honest, you file in West Virginia, the judge is going to side with you no matter what you say. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that's crazy. But that's the reality of where we are with this political bifurcation.
Absolutely.
Outside of any grand conspiracy or narrative crafting or whatever we want to say may have happened, I think his defense lawyers just said, look, man, pretend that tell everyone that it's the evil boogeyman far right that made you do it and cross your fingers.
Well, you mentioned earlier Jenna Ellis, and part of what's going on here is that the plea bargain system has become a legal bludgeon, in which they come to you and in effect say, we can get something on you no matter what. And now what they do is because of the large federal accordion of statutes, they can re-describe the same thing you did and have multiple charges. Mm-hmm. In my campaign finance case, they were like, we'll get you on bank fraud because you took your money out of the bank. We'll get you on mail fraud because you put your check in the mail. And see, those things carry years in prison. And so then they go, okay, but if you sign here and plead to this, and so whether you're guilty or innocent makes no difference. If you make a rational calculation, you have to take the plea. But of course, politically, it's ruinous because then everybody jumps up and goes, see, he admitted it. Mm-hmm. So
let me give you an example. I was at a criminal trial a long time ago. This is another lifetime. And the federal prosecutors said of the defendant, who quite literally broke no law, but they were trying to put him in prison for decades. I was flabbergasted when I heard the prosecutor say it was sentencing hearing, why they wanted to justify very, very long prison sentence. And the prosecutor said, Your Honor, the defendant used a uniform resource locator through the hypertext transfer protocol to obtain private information of people he did not have the right to get information from. And I was like, oh my God. He just said the dude typed in a URL into a web browser, but he said it in such a way so that the jury and the judge would be like, wow, what is this crazy technical thing for which I am not understanding? If I said, Your Honor, the dude typed some words into the browser bar and pressed enter and they sent him information, he'd be like, well, I do that every day. Mm-hmm. Right. But they're trying to justify putting him in prison for a decade plus. So that's why they use that language.
I mean, after this police state film, people come up to me and they're like, well, Dinesh, I'm not Donald Trump and I didn't go in the Capitol on January 6th and I pay my taxes and, I'm okay. They're not going to come after me. And I say to these guys, I go, listen, why don't you tell me for 10 minutes about your life? What do? Tell me where you live. Tell me how you get to work. You're a doctor. And I say, after 10 minutes, I will tell you 3 felonies that you can be charged with that you will be defenseless against. So, for example, you're a doctor. Okay, I'm going to charge you with illegal administration of pain medication. I will find one client that you administered a pain drug to who says, I didn't need it. Right? Mm-hmm. And I will then bring in an expert witness, a doctor, who will testify she really didn't need it. You'll be facing years in prison. You'll be facing not being able to be a doctor ever again. Or you take a plea bargain. You pay a $100,000 fine. You don't practice for a year, and then you can get back into it. Well, who wouldn't take that deal? Yep. You know that they got you.
It's blackmail.
And it's blackmail, and you're being framed.
Well, it's called the jury tax. That's right. Yeah, it's some people call it the trial tax or the jury tax, and the argument they make is, well, you see, when you plead guilty, you're accepting responsibility, which shows some remorse and some change already. Therefore, you'll get a lesser sentence for that. The reality is, the emergence of this is mostly due to the fact that the state cannot handle the amount of cases laid before it. If every person in this country who was criminally charged demanded a jury trial, the system would collapse overnight.
Well, I just want to mention, because we spoke to him on the show probably about 2 years ago, but Brandon Straka had a very similar situation. Mm-hmm. He did not go in the Capitol. He was just out on the steps. They claimed that they heard his voice in the footage that he filmed saying something that wasn't even necessarily incendiary, even in and of itself. And they were threatening him with something like 19 years in prison. And so they got him to plea down, basically. Yep.
This is what I remember about covering the Proud Boys trial, right? They were all charged with conspiracy, but also if you look back in the documents, Dominic Pizzola, who had thrown something, or there was a video of him like taking glass out of a window. He disputes if he like broke it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He got moved onto the case way later. They moved people around based on who they could offer pleas to create this idea that there was a uniform conspiracy.
Well, that's what was so amazing about the Whitmer federal criminal trial. And I know you guys had Brandon Caserta on. And the fact that you had, and the thing with plea deals too, is they are considered convictions by the Department of Justice. There's not a category that's like, and this is true, I just looked it up, 80% of federal criminal cases, charges are pleaded out, but they're still listed as a conviction. So what was so amazing with the Whitmer Fednapping trial is that you had 2 of the 6 federal defendants who pleaded guilty and then they became government witnesses. But then you had 4 defendants who took the risk. They went to trial in a jurisdiction, really a jury of their peers, which they had. And you had 2 men, Daniel Harris and Brandon Caserta, who were here, who were acquitted outright on every single charge. And then the other 2 men who had a hung jury. And of course, then the DOJ went back. But that's why it's so amazing. That case in and of itself is just amazing what happened.
Let me pull up this story real quick so we can carry on this conversation. This is a story from the Post-Millennial. Atlanta Antifa militants claim to have torched concrete company trucks in effort to stop Cop City. This is an ongoing terror campaign currently taking place in Atlanta. There have been 61 indictments, but guess what? As Julie pointed out, but as we're starting the show, these are state level and not federal level. So Antifa is actively engaged. These are people who are part of cells. These are people who have come from outside the country. We know this. And they have cells all over the country. They work with each other. They organize. They have plans. They have workbooks. And we are told consistently the far right is the real threat. I want to add something. In the previous segment, we were talking about the jury tax or the trial tax, where they force people to take plea bargains. Dinesh was pointing out that he can get, you tell me about your life and he can point out 3 felonies. I want to tell you guys something, and then I want to open the conversation up to January 6th and your film, The Police State. On January 20th, 2017, several hundred far leftists stormed through Washington, D.C., throwing Molotov cocktails. I should tone it down a little bit. Setting fires in the street, torching vehicles, smashing windows, and fighting with cops. Several hundred got arrested. I know I was one of those people who got arrested. I was released after I asked a supervisor, and I showed him my press pass. He told me, too bad, you're under arrest, you're not free to go. And then eventually a supervisor ordered the release of journalists, of which I was then de-arrested by the police. I was never processed. This group was, all of these people were charged. And guess what? Not only did most of them have the charges dropped, the city paid them millions of dollars. And it was for one reason. They all refused to take a plea deal. The state was struggling, or I shouldn't say the state, the federal government. These are the feds. They almost never lose cases, but they could not get any of these individuals. Why? Antifa wear all black for a reason. It doesn't matter if a cop actually sees you. A cop could see you, you could take your mask off, you could smile, and you can wave. And when it comes to the criminal trial, the defense will say, what was the defendant wearing? And it'll say a black hoodie, a black bandana, a black jeans with black gloves. And you say he looked at you and smiled. That's right. Could you have been mistaken? I mean, there were 300 people wearing the exact same thing. And the cop will say, no, it was him. And he'll look at the jury and be like, do you believe that? That he actually knew who this guy was with everyone wearing the same thing? They couldn't get him on conspiracy charges, and they couldn't get anyone to believe that they singled out individuals with crimes. So the entire group, in their organized act of terrorism at Donald Trump's inauguration, were not only having their charges dismissed, but they were paid out millions of dollars.
And let's not forget the 529 insurrection.
Absolutely.
When they broke down the barriers outside of the White House and forced the president of the United States into a bunker instead of
firebombed the White House grounds.
That's right. And the media's concern about that was that Trump was very mean and he used tear gas so that he could get across the street and stop them from burning down a historic church.
If they, just like Dinesh was saying earlier, just by talking to someone, you can come up with, multiple felonies. If the federal government actually wanted to stop this kind of stuff, they absolutely could.
I think this is the key, that for years now, we have focused on the rhetoric of the double standard.
Yeah, we live in the logic of Herbert Marcuse.
Look at the way that the government treats Trump versus Biden. Look at the treatment of Antifa versus Antifa BLM on the one hand versus, let's say, the January 6th protesters on the other. Now, how do you resolve a double standard? Because a double standard usually has a kind of a hidden premise. And the hidden premise here is that we have a government that wants to apply the law equitably. And if that is the case, then there certainly is a double standard. They're not doing that. Yeah. But let's remove that assumption. Let's assume that you're dealing with an emerging police state, and now it's a police state, but we're not North Korea, right? If we were North Korea or China, I couldn't make a movie called Police State. So we have to be a police state in the making, under construction, if you will. And if a police state is under construction, it needs political allies. It would ideally like to have a whole political party that is in bed with the police state. That's going to help build it. And so the police state is going to say, the police state now becomes like the family dog. Notice how the family dog is really friendly to members of the family and barks at strangers. So the family dog is not a hypocrite. The family dog can distinguish between the pals and strangers. And similarly, the police state is friendly toward the people who are helping to build the police state, even as it is unremittingly hostile to anybody that it sees as a threat to the police state. And if you apply the single standard, it all makes sense. You don't have a double standard anymore. They're acting consistently.
It's a hierarchy.
That's absolutely right. Well, you can also recognize them as the militant arm of the party that's in power, basically. And we've seen this historically. Communists have always done this. The communists did this in Spain, where people who are non-government officials or weren't necessarily commissioned to by the government were going and digging up the dead bodies of nuns and priests and displaying them in churches in order to persecute Christians. And the government just wouldn't arrest them when they did it. Because, of course, they were perfectly happy to see them do that. And that was the fact of the matter. And that's what we have in the United States today. Antifa and BLM run around burning down buildings, destroying people's lives, doing violence against innocent people. And even though they aren't technically owned or told to do this by the Democratic Party or the political establishment, it allows them to, so it's just the same.
When people share an ideology, they don't need direct orders from top-down authority. If they all are looking for essentially the same result, which is to delegitimize the fundamental principles that the United States is built on, if they're looking for that result, all the tactics that they come up with, they're all acceptable. Tim's talked about shared a diversity of tactics. Yeah, Tim's talked about that a bunch of times.
When you go to a left liberal protest where there's thousands of people, you will see what they look, man. These people lie because in their worldview, lying to accomplish your goal is fine. The ends justify the means. And what you end up with is a wide range from liberal to far left extremist tankies. And they all say the same thing. Respect the diversity of tactics. And I would ask them what that means. And they would say, well, not everybody agrees there's one way to bring about change. So if someone that we may not completely agree with how they're doing things, but we're mostly aligned politically, we just back off and let them do their thing.
I want to point something out right now. October 7th, the attack in Israel, that was a diversity of tactics.
Yes.
That's the same exact thing. And that's why you see the left.
In New York City, people saying they're freedom fighters, decolonize. This is what people should pay attention to. Not every single person who is in support of Palestine is in support of Hamas. Fair point. Not every single person who was marching knows exactly what they're protesting, but they're all told the same thing by the organizers to respect the diversity of tactics is the phrase they use. Now think about what that means. When a guy stands up with a megaphone and celebrates 5,000 rocket attacks exploding over Tel Aviv or hitting some of these hospitals or whatever, when they cheer for their resistance fighters, these other liberals who don't really know a lot are told, but you have to respect it. And so they may not 100% align, but they don't interfere as these people advocate for these things. Here's the important takeaway. You may not care about Israel, Palestine, we're the United States. I think domestic issues are way more important. Totally fair. But when you have people marching alongside pro-Hamas extremists, and these people don't care about Hamas, but they're holding up decolonize signs and clapping for the freedom fighters, understand what their mentality is here in the United States. They would do exactly as Hamas did here to accomplish their goals.
100%.
To the point where Hassan Piker on his show said, but some of those babies are settlers, in reference to the justification of killing settlers, referencing that babies are also settlers. I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'd like to, but I think it's very dangerous when a dude has consistently been in support of, like, look, when Hassan literally says that Hamas is just morally and legally in the right to do these things, to reclaim stolen land, and then adds, and babies are settlers, I just don't see, I don't see why we should give him the benefit of the doubt.
Hassan?
We also, this is such an awkward topic because until you have a firsthand experience, it is difficult to believe. Now, Julie, for example, you've sat in on so many trials, right? And we've talked a little bit about this. I mean, you almost feel like you're living in a surreal America because you're seeing it, and yet it is a knowledge that is a little incommunicable. For me, like a turning point in my whole career was, if you had asked me 10 years ago or 15 years ago, like, what's American politics in a nutshell? I would go, well, it's like a debating society. You've got the left, you got the right. You have two different visions. These people value liberty. These people value equality, equality of rights, equality of outcomes. And you put these rival visions before the American people, and the people choose. And sometimes they go this side, sometimes they go that side. And then when I was sitting across from the lawyers of the Obama DOJ, and I realized in this conversation I'm having with these guys that for a trivial offense, if they could have locked me up for 10 years, they would have done it. And I realized, whoa, well, that's a wrecking ball in my whole theory of American politics. Or even all the guys I knew, I lived in D.C. So it's a small town. I knew E.J. Dionne at the Washington Post. I knew guys at all the different, liberal outlets. And I saw these guys in Trover Bookstore. I saw them in restaurants. When my case came up, they'd come up to me, they'd be like, Dinesh, man, looks like you're really being shafted. And I'd be like, okay, EJ, well, if I'm being shafted, Megyn Kelly's saying that on Fox News, but it'd be really helpful if you said that in the Washington Post. Because for a liberal to defend me against Obama, I got that kind of awkward, I can't really do that. Yeah. And then you realize, again, that this is not quite the America you thought you were living in. It's become gangsterized.
No, politics is America's most extreme and crazy team sport. You have to be loyal to your side no matter what. And I think that's true on both sides. It's really easy to see where the left locks down. In some ways, they're more effective, right? They're able to get a lot of young people to go out and do their bidding by saying these trigger words and saying colonizer, and then they all know exactly what side they're against. But I also think that the right does this too, where there are some portions of the party where they say, I'm too afraid to say anything. I mean, that was what I found really interesting about the Freedom Caucus, right? They, all of these people started saying, these are our values. We have American first values we want to push forward. And they gained traction even though the mainstream RNC was not super comfortable with it.
Well, they're being defeated and it feels pretty good. So hearing Kevin McCarthy elbowed Burchett in the back, I'm like, man, he's losing it. But so be it. The stories that I've heard about the things the established Republicans have done to good Americans who wanted to serve this country and sometimes serve it again, this time as public officers. Good riddance to this extremism and tribalism.
So I'll circle back a little bit to the Daily Wire here because a thought just occurred to me that with regard to the Candace business, and that is that Daily Wire has been out of sync with Trump, right? They've been kind of part of the Never Trumper camp and so on, and they're a very successful company. But it's a little tricky for them as a brand. You're a very successful company, but you're out of sync with the mainstream of the Republican Party. So Daily Wire needs some MAGA spirit, if only to deflect the Never Trumpism that's clearly in Daily Wire. So Candace actually has a lot of leverage because she represents that. She comes in from that kind of MAGA wing, if you will. And then Daily Wire can say, as Jeremy Boring has said, we are open to all different points of view and so on. And
they can ask themselves, why is her audience loyal to her? I mean, it makes them potentially expand their business model.
Of course. Exactly. That's my point, is that the Daily Wire, there's always a little bit of a danger that they go the way of the National Review.
Yes.
The National Review dug in on anti-Trump, on Never Trump, would not back off. and pushed out Victor Davis Hanson, who was basically the one
crime,
the one pro-Trump guy, but and a historian who knows more than all of them combined.
He's brilliant. He's great.
Yeah,
a lot of people right now are very critical of the Daily Wire, especially in our chat. But I hope this is worth at least something. Man, when I sit down with big corporate media companies and lawyers, and I've rejected all of them, it is the most annoying and insulting thing. I've had companies send me contracts where they're like, here's the deal, here's what we want to do. I'm like, this sounds great. We shake hands. They send me a contract, totally the opposite, that steals everything and is destructive. And the response is, we'll hire a lawyer and redline it. And when I sat down with Jeremy, it was like talking, it was legit. Mm-hmm. And I really do respect that. I feel bad for him with all this going on. I hope at the end of it, there's no bad blood. Candace and Ben get along. I hope this resolves itself, generates some press for him. It's not just about, I know them and I don't like it when people fight, but it really is also about if we're all in agreement on 90% of things, then come on, man. If the far left can all wear the same clothes and get away with committing crimes, we're not even anywhere like trying to advocate for anything close to that. We're just saying, guys, let's focus on the issues that we need to focus on and stop tearing each other down.
Well, we want to build a parallel economy, and to do that, and we're in a hard business because people block you. You can't advertise on YouTube, and you can't put your ads up on Facebook, and then Walmart won't sell your DVDs. So if you can build a successful company with that wind against you, you're doing something right. So that's...
Yeah. And I think no matter what happens right now at the Daily Wire, they have done a lot of really positive things.
Oh, I think we just lost your mic. Did you?
I touched my wire one time. I said that the Daily Wire has done positive things. We don't need a monolith of every single news organization or, alternative media company saying exactly the same thing, but they themselves have to tolerate a little bit of diversity of thought.
Absolutely.
I just want to touch on one thing with Dinesh's political prosecution, and I firmly believe that's what it was. I've said that before. I've done videos on it discussing it.
Well, can we get a elevator pitch as to what that was, just so for the people who aren't super familiar with the details?
Sure. A college friend of mine, Wendy Long, decided to run for the Senate. I begged her not to. I told her that she was would lose terribly, but she goes, I want to do it. So I go, okay, I'll help you. I gave her $10,000, which is the campaign finance limit. But what was happening is I'd put out a new film on Obama. I was traveling all over the country. And you know how it is with a friend of yours. She's like, oh, Dinesh, can you come and meet these Indian doctors? I mean, they're Indian, you're Indian. We want to raise some money here. I'm like, oh, Wendy, I'm in Dallas. So I felt bad. So I told two of my friends, listen, do you like Wendy Long? Give her $10,000. I'll reimburse you. So this was my crime. Mm-hmm. I exceeded the campaign finance law. And look, I did, right? So I should get the same penalty as anybody else who did that. But normally that penalty is nothing. Or at the most, it's community service, a warning, especially if it's a first-time offense. The key to the campaign finance law is you're not doing a quid pro quo. Like, hey, I'll give you money, but I want you to make me a judge. Mm-hmm. Then you're getting something corrupt out of the deal. This was not the case here, not even charged. So that was what my case was about. And the U.S. government would have liked to have locked me up for more than as long as they could. But 2 years was the sort of statutory maximum. So they were going for it. They had a Clinton appointee judge. I mean, the whole thing was like a show trial.
Who was your
judge? And he made you get re-educated.
Berman in New York.
Berman?
Yeah.
Oh, in New York.
In New York, so.
It was SDNY, the Southern District of New York.
Oh,
so
wow.
So it was Eric Holder, but operating through an Indian stooge whom I nicknamed Indian head waiter, Preet Bharara. A guy who's had a lot of notorious cases.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so on top of all this, right, so this is a crime that, as you mentioned, people normally will get community service for, or it's not prosecuted.
Well,
and not only do they send you to prison, but they have you do community service. I'm sorry, they have you do re-education, basically.
Re-education, a big fine. I mean, when I told people I had 5 years probation, there were guys in prison who were like coyotes, drug smugglers. I mean, people who had been for rape, and they were like, I got 2 years. They couldn't believe it. And I had great difficulty, one of the key things about prison is like, what are you in for? And part of the problem was I felt like I might make all these enemies because none of them believed what I would say. They're like, whose money did you take? I'm like, no, I didn't take anybody's money. I gave too much of my own money.
And they're like, this guy's lying. Yeah. We can't trust him.
What did you? How much time did you end up?
So
serving?
I was 8 months in an overnight confinement center. So I was free in the day, but I checked in at 7 at night. And I would check out at 7 in the morning. And I slept in a dorm with 70 hardened criminals on a bunk bed.
Did you make friends?
I made some acquaintances, perhaps not friends, but it's a window into our criminal justice system.
Yeah, it's a unique experience.
It's a very unique experience.
Although maybe not really. A lot of people are incarcerated.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Seamus. What did you?
Yeah, well, no, I just want to mention this because what you said is it would have helped you if people on the left would have stood up for you when you were the victim of an obvious political prosecution. What's very sad today is when people on the right are victims of political prosecution, people on the right won't even stand up for them. We've gotten to that point.
Prior to your case, who was politically prosecuted before you? I feel like you're the first kind of high-profile one, at least since the turn of the century.
It was the first case, but interestingly at the time I saw it as a one-off. I mean, I did not see it as a prelude to Carter Page, Papadopoulos, Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, Trump, because the way I saw it was, okay, I made a movie on Obama. It was emotionally damaging because I went to the Obama family homestead. I interviewed his brother. I made it kind of personal. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I know this guy's a vindictive narcissist. So I should have known there's going to be a big target on my back. But I didn't see the institutional creep that has occurred. The escalation under Biden of the police state has taken me by surprise.
Do you feel like you were sort of a test case? They were seeing how they could test the law and apply it in this kind of scenario?
Yeah, I thought my case was a one-off where Obama, and this is funny because I go speak on campuses, right? And people would be like, I'd be like, I was targeted. And then people go, well, what makes you think Obama watched your stupid movie? And I go, well, the movie was in 2,000 theaters. And when the movie reached the second most successful political film ever made, I was being attacked every day on a website called BarackObama.com. So that's kind of where I got the wacky idea that maybe Obama didn't like my film.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy
even if he didn't,
conspiracy theorist.
If somebody makes a film, someone makes a documentary expose on you, explaining all the things wrong with you, you don't have to see the movie to not like the person. Like, it's not like Obama would have to sit down and be like, I disagree with this film. Like, Dinesh, that was bad. But like, people around him were like, he said this and he showed your family in this light, and that's all you need.
Obama went after the Tea Party.
That's
correct.
right.
The IRS started unjustly auditing them. And then we also know that Barack Obama charged more people, whistleblowers and journalists under the Espionage Act than all other presidents combined. They call him Obama. I believe that Barack Obama may be one of the worst presidents. Mm-hmm. In my lifetime, I think he's the worst. And
Worse
a lot
than
of people.
Joe?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Joe may be heavily influenced or puppeted by Obama. But let me say this. I know it's kind of tough because you got W. Bush, you got Iraq, you got Afghanistan, it just horrible things, and you have like Bush's attempt at Presidential Directive 51, if you guys are familiar with that. But Barack Obama has like the National Defense Authorization Act, indefinite detention provisions, the persecution of journalists, the extrajudicial assassinations of American citizens. Mm-hmm. We have what he did to you. We have what he did to the Tea Party. And, honestly, the list goes on.
Well,
bombing civilian targets. Crossfire Hurricane. How about Fast and Furious?
He knew all about it.
Obama,
Fast and Furious sending guns to cartels.
This is the most protected man in American history. And part of it was the first black president. That gave him an immediate sort of halo. And he's also one of the most ruthless. So I think
he's still around.
Yeah, mm-hmm. and now he reflects a tendency that's broad on the left, because you can tell whenever you're looking at stuff that the leftists do, they know that they are above the law. When Jamal Bowman pulled the fire extinguisher, mm-hmm. he removed the signs. I bet it never crossed his mind, I'm going to be arrested, I'm going to be locked up, I'm going to be held for 3 months.
He was probably insulted when he got arrested.
Yeah,
he was probably.
Do you know who I am?
Yeah.
Or look at those protesters. What was it? In which building? Was it the Cannon building?
Yeah.
Building. I didn't see the slightest fear in their eyes that they're going to come in here, drag us to the floor,
Dinesh,
put us in solitary. They knew it was never going to happen.
Do you think Barack Obama is a leftist, or do you think he's a bad liberal?
No, I think that this is a guy, and I've done a lot of work on Obama.
That's why I asked.
I think this is a guy who is haunted by anti-colonial demons that came from his father, and his father was a very intoxicating. Well, he was intoxicated. He was drunk, but he was also a very captivating personality, mm-hmm. A complete con artist. In Kenya, for example, he would frequently show up at public events pretending to be a minister of this, a minister of finance. He'd be up on the podium giving a speech when the real minister of finance would walk in the door. I mean, there's a comic aspect.
And then
to
he'd
this.
have him arrested. He's faking it.
Yeah,
I see that in Obama's brother. I see that in
and Obama, and he abandoned Obama at birth, basically. And paradoxically, Obama was obsessed with the father he never had. He goes down to Kenya. He goes to his father's grave. He has this kind of voodoo experience at the grave. It's all in my film, by the way, 2016, Obama's America. Obama's a very interesting guy. And I think part of what put me onto him was I had been seeing him through a civil rights lens. You know, this is a guy, his background is like Montgomery, it's Selma, Martin Luther King, and that's how he was being portrayed.
Yeah.
And then when I read his autobiography, Dreams from My Father, I was like, oh, wow, this is really more like the India I grew up in. All the Indian intellectuals talking about anti-colonialism and the British. I'm like, this is the soil in which this guy was cultivated.
So you think he's a leftist then?
He is a leftist in this, you know, we're talking about Hamas, decolonization, Israel is the colonial power, little babies are settlers. Yeah. That's Obama's ideology.
He's a smart guy.
He's a smart guy.
You can't underestimate, I mean, the degree to which he has been influential, the authoritarian grasp and the things that he's been able to do are shocking.
Well, you have Lisa Monaco, who was a longtime loyalist of his. His last Homeland Security advisor was Chief of Staff to Robert Mueller, and where is she now? She's the Deputy Attorney General. You have Avril Haines, who also was a top deputy for Barack Obama, and she is now Joe Biden's Director of National Intelligence. And of course, then you had Susan Rice, who was the domestic policy advisor for a long time. So he is the only president who has remained in Washington, D.C. And now we know from reporting that you have Biden administration officials and Democrats going to their mansion in Kalorama and meeting with him. So he still is highly influential in this administration and the Democratic Party overall.
If Obama decided it is important to me to move Biden out and Kamala Harris out, don't you think that this would then become a top priority for the Democratic Party?
But do you think that's why Biden is running again? Because Obama ultimately wants him to stay in office so he can continue to have control?
Well,
because I don't think the DNC wants Biden at all.
So we have this line, I think it's one of the best lines in Police State, where in this Darren Beatty's talking and he goes, in a police state, he goes, you normally know who's running it, right? Who's running China? Xi. Who was running Cuba? Castro. Who was running the old Soviet Union? Stalin. But our police state, says Darren, is a little opaque. Biden is in the canoe. He's obviously a willing accomplice, but who's steering the canoe? We don't know. I mean, this is a country right now being run, in my view, by some kind of a junta. Yeah. There are powerful people who are making decisions. Biden is cooperating with them. Obama may or may not be directing them, but I think it's the Obamaites, it's the Obama gang that's running it. And in a way, Biden's very convenient because, I mean, think about it. You bring in you bring in some strong-willed guy from California, Gavin Newsom. He's going to want to run the show. He's going to want to give orders.
He's got a future ahead of him.
Biden can't be the candidate. He can't be the nominee. I mean, there's this really great clip we have from a Joe Rogan experience with The Rock, where The Rock says, look, I got friends who support Trump. I got friends who support Biden. And then Joe goes, you actually have friends that support Joe Biden? And he goes, no. Good check. He's like, that context matters. I have friends who support the Democrats.
The reason that they can't have him, though, is because of the gaffes that he's likely to do that are going to likely get worse. Not because he won't listen or that.
No. It's because... here's what I wonder, that the reason why they wanted Biden to be the candidate in 2020 was because they needed a sacrificial lamb. Whoever they put in place had to reverse policies Trump did that worked and made us feel good. And that's going to cause a lot of hurt. Whoever does that is going to suffer in the polls and in favorability. So we need someone who's not going to run again. All we need is your corporeal form, Joe Biden. That's what the article said. Remember that one from The Atlantic? Stay alive, Joe Biden. All we need is your corporeal form.
I think you're right, but I still think that the risk of having Joe Biden run again is because a failure on his part, a mistake, an error shows that he's not the guy running the show.
Well, that's what I was about to mention. Dinesh, you made this point about the U.S. almost being this strange kind of puppet state where we don't actually know who's in control behind the scenes. And this is something people always speculated might be the case. But then when Joe Biden came along, it just became obvious that at least in this administration, that definitely has to be the case. There's no way this guy's making decisions. He does not know he's the president. I'm sure he forgets half the time, more than half the time. The man's completely out of it. I mean, he's in steep cognitive decline.
It was pretty clear that there were times when Donald Trump would try to get something done and the bureaucracy itself would be working against him.
And they admitted it.
And they admitted it. And I think with Joe Biden, it is clear that whether or not Joe Biden says the right thing, the bureaucracy already knows what's going to happen. I mean, he said it himself. They'll get mad at me if I say that. What do they want me to do? He speaks like that regularly.
Julie, what do you think about the Biden's chances in 2024?
You're
going to vote for him?
I don't think he's going anywhere. And if he wanted to, there's no way that Dr. Jill will let him leave the White House because she wants to stay first lady more than I think he wants to be president.
You think that she has?
There's no way.
What do you know about
he's like begging her to let him
input
stop?
and her machinations of towards power or whatever? What do you know?
She wants to be first lady. She wants to stay first lady. She wants to insulate that family, which they are to a degree. Obviously, they are because they're still in the White House. I don't see any way to get him out of there. He's not going to leave voluntarily unless, he
look
dies.
At the people
there's no way.
Look at
He's
the
not
way that the
leaving
Democrats with a straight face, and there's got to be a little part of them that's a little sheepish in saying this kind of stuff. But I mean, recently you saw on MSNBC, someone goes, well, Biden's more articulate than any functioning 45-year-old, right? I mean, for someone...
That is sad for 45-year-olds.
Yeah, for someone to say that with a straight face. But with Democrats, they can count, and Fetterman's the same. They can count on a level of media rationalization, media protection that is just... that will go to insane levels to defend these people.
And I think they have gone out of the way to present themselves as like the best family they could, partially because they have so much baggage looking at you, Hunter. I mean, look back at Naomi Biden's wedding that got her spread in Vogue, and the first picture you see is her and, her grandmother Jill cuddled on the couch. They are trying to say we are this like ultimate American family and we are restoring the White House to this nice place. But
I mean, look at the intellectual jujitsu where you got a family racket, and then they come out and go, well, I mean, this shows you that this man has just an absolutely immeasurable love for his kid.
Right.
And even when his kid... That's right.
You got a mob boss?
No, this Vogue shoot that I'm referencing, it's interesting because it was like right before Tiffany Trump's wedding at Mar-a-Lago, but also Hunter's nowhere to be seen in it, right? The Bidens are basically trying to pass themselves off as this nice set of grandparents, skip a generation, and then they've got all these granddaughters, forget the grandsons. You know what I mean? Like, it's a weird family, and they ultimately do these things to be palatable to the American people, to seem glamorous and desirable, and to stay in the White House.
So do you think Jill and Joe have kind of like a Bill Hillary thing going on here where she's actually pulling the strings and he's just the face of the organization? Because he's honestly not a very good face, right? Like Bill Clinton has many flaws, but he had some charisma, so I could understand why someone like her would attach herself to him in order to try and get her goals.
In the 90s, he was maximally charismatic
and,
in the 90s.
Still horrible back then, still a horrible man, but
he was in charge.
Joe was
Clinton
never charming.
In charge, right?
But Joe sniffs children. Constantly.
Joe Biden was very charming. I mean, that's how he got where he was. That's where he got where he is.
He always seemed like a phony and a blowhard. Even when I watch old clips of him, he just seems like a phony and a blowhard.
That works in
never
Washington.
struck me as charming. He didn't.
Yeah, in his younger days, he had a frat boy quality. By the way, similar to Clinton.
Yes.
I think in the Clinton case, Hillary was sufficiently self-aware to realize that she could not make it across the finish line without Bill. So I think she signed up with Bill early on. She understood that this was a bargain because it was going to come with a lot of baggage. Bill was going to do his own thing. But Hillary was like, that's okay because I've got my eye on power. And in the end, if I become kind of Bill's cover-up man...
There are similar conversations had about Jackie Kennedy and JFK, that she was aware of some of his, less desirable qualities, specifically philandering, and that she chose anyways not to seek political office, but generally to seek social capital and power.
Interesting. Yes.
I want to jump to this story. We have this tweet that Phil had actually retweeted from Yashir Ali. He tweets, over the past 24 hours, thousands of TikToks at least have been posted where people share how they just read bin Laden's infamous letter to America in which he explained why he attacked the United States. The TikToks are from people of all ages, races, ethnicities, and backgrounds. Many of them say that reading the letter has opened their eyes and they'll never see geopolitical matters the same way again. Many of them, and I've watched a lot, say it has made them reevaluate their perspective on how what is often labeled as terrorism can be a legitimate form of resistance to a hostile power. This is not limited to TikTok. Similar videos have been posted on other social media platforms. The Guardian had a copy of Letter to America posted, but once these TikToks went viral, The Guardian took it down, which has only led to more interest in the letter and conspiracies from TikTokers who say this is part of the media and the powers that control it trying to silence the truth. And my takeaway from this, my personal perspective, TikTok wants to foster a pro-Hamas, pro-terror,
anti-West,
decolonizer. This is why I have been in favor of banning TikTok. Yeah, I don't care. Sorry. The free speech, the First Amendment, all that applies to the United States. And if foreign entities are attacking us and trying to subvert the country, then we do something about it. Maybe banning isn't the answer, but something must be done. And you get these Republicans who are like, they're spying on our data. And I'm like, oh, I don't care about that. I care about TikTok promoting thousands of letters to America, bin Laden perspectives on 9/11 to young people.
The important thing about TikTok isn't that that China may be collecting data. It's that people are being fed information, and the like button is such a massive influence on people if they make.
And their algorithms manipulated.
Yeah,
we know that their equivalent app feeds very different things to their young people than it does to American young people.
Yeah,
I mean, that is a huge amount of influence and control to give over. We talk about the fact that you shouldn't send your kids to public schools because you're giving their teachers like a sort of unfettered chance to shape their brains, but you buy them a smartphone and let them get on TikTok.
And if kids are getting this kind of stuff fed to them all the time, in conjunction with not getting a civics education about how our government works, why things are the way they are. If you tell a kid that we're a democracy from when they're 5 years old until they're 18 years old, and they think we're a democracy, and then there's a president that is elected and doesn't get the majority vote, they're going to think, oh, this is terrible. If they understood how our system works, they wouldn't have this massive negative reaction to it. They'd be like, well, it works this way, and I understand why. The ignorance that people have about our own government, our own fundamental principles that our country is founded on, and how our government works is probably the worst thing that is going on in the politics today, is the ignorance people have about the way that our system works.
Mm. Yeah. Are there riots going on right now at the DNC? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh man. Well, how about that?
The DNC here?
You guys want to take a field trip?
Is there a pipe bomb there? Was that the pipe bomb?
No idea.
No, I don't know. I'm just seeing videos.
It's not far at all.
We're like right there. Libby Emmons posted a video of they're fighting cops. They're trying to break into the building.
That's happening right now.
It's happening right now.
And now we're going to take IRL live on the street to the DNC.
All right.
Should I go to the riot?
Everyone just pick up your microphone, your own camera.
Don't grab your wire.
I can't. I'm not.
Yeah, I'm seeing these tweets, and this is wow. This is absolutely insane. Greg Price tweets: "This is currently happening outside the DNC headquarters in Washington. Far left pro-Palestine rioters are clashing with police trying to enter the building." It's really funny that I'm pulling up in the middle of our young people are being manipulated into supporting terror.
Yeah, you know what?
They're literally acting out terrorism.
I'll offer a couple thoughts about this because it actually flashes my mind to right after 9/11, as you know, TV went off the air. Sure. And then the next Monday was the first time it was back on, and I was on with Bill Maher. I was on Bill Maher's show, Politically Incorrect.
Had you already been scheduled to be there?
I'd been scheduled to be there.
What a time.
But interestingly...
We're like a couple blocks away.
Yeah, interestingly, another guest was, who was the name of the woman who died in 9/11? The wife of Barbara Olson. Barbara Olson was scheduled Barbara Olson was scheduled to be on with us.
I'm so glad when I remember things.
And so we had this Bill Maher session with an empty chair, you know. But the reason I mention this is that the conversation led to Bill Maher getting fired from the show. And Bill Maher asked me in that show, he goes, asking about the terrorists, he goes, would you say that the 9/11 terrorists were cowards? And I said, in my opinion, no. I said, it's not. I said, it takes something to be able to fly a plane into a building. Just like if you tell me to get in my car right now and drive into a concrete structure, I'm going to be a little reluctant to do that. And then Bill Maher went on to say, well, I think our military are the real cowards because we sit 4,000 miles away and press a button and kill people in other countries. And that got all the veterans against him and so on. And he, that's how he got the boot. The reason I mention all this is because in the background was bin Laden's letter to America. Because bin Laden makes one point, and I bet you this is what's getting all these TikTok people riled up. Basically, what bin Laden says is that in a democracy, there are no civilians. Mm-hmm. He says, we did 9/11, yes. And he goes, but that's because the American people democratically voted for the governments that have these policies. And so you're asking me, bin Laden says, to distinguish between military and civilian targets. But what if the civilians are the ones who are putting the elected leaders who have these policies in power?
They're consenting to their military.
Yes, they are basically themselves part of the problem.
I got a video right here. Sorry, I'm just watching these breaking clips where this woman says our own party is attacking peaceful protesters and et cetera, et cetera. I can't see how Democrats are going to be able to win next year.
The Democrats that think that the protesters are in their party are having a wake-up call, and this is something that I've mentioned on the show a lot. There is a difference, and it's why it relates to why I asked you about Barack Obama. There is a difference between leftists and Democrats. Democrats are liberals that are doing bad things because leftists have tricked them.
Yes, but so what did we see in 2020? We saw prominent leftist YouTubers and personalities say, vote Biden. And now what we're seeing with this wave, okay, a year is an eternity in politics, so maybe by next November, this stuff doesn't even play as big a role as we thought. However, what percentage, you guys might know this, Dinesh, you might know this, what percentage of the vote comes from the 18 to 24 voting block? It's low, I know.
It's relatively low, yeah. I don't know the percentage, but it's not significant enough to carry.
3%?
I'm going to look it up.
Maybe a little more.
Let's look it up, yeah.
More.
Maybe
if the Democrats lost,
well, think of
let's say
how they won in 2022. College campuses. That's how they won.
Let's say it's 5%. Mm-hmm. If they lost half that, I don't see how they could drop 2.5 points over the Palestine stuff. But I think it'll be more substantial. I think what we're going to end up seeing now with these viral videos, you're going to see subversive right-wing accounts targeting the left by replaying clips like this of Democrats attacking pro-Palestine protesters in an effort to fracture the youth vote for Democrats.
Interesting question. I mean, the Democrats have three ways to go, right? They can go with the Palestine resistors. That's one way to go. The second way is to go the opposite direction, and basically the way Biden started out, I'm for Israel. And the third way is to try to accommodate both.
They can't do both.
They can't do both.
And they will not sacrifice AIPAC and the Jewish community.
No, they're going to go the way that the soccer moms will vote, because that's who really kind of wins for the Democrats, regardless of like when soccer moms voted for Trump and they voted Republican, the Democrats lost because of it. Your average soccer mom that is a suburban mother that has kids in school, that's the core of the Democrat Party. And they influence not just them, it's not just them, but they influence the whole household. Mm-hmm. So I think they're still going to focus.
How do you explain the enthusiasm of the Democrats for not just the trans issue, but all kinds of extreme perversion that can't possibly go down very well with soccer moms?
I think that mostly it's leftists that are pushing that stuff, activists.
Right, but why doesn't the Democratic Party go, we want nothing to do with
because they've been too afraid to actually stand up and take the heat, because you do have to take heat when you stand up against what amounts to the LGBT lobby. It's not just, you're not just saying, oh, this is bad, so that you're taking the fact that it is a mean, quote unquote, perspective to say, no, we should have limits on what kind of stuff our children can be exposed to. And then to top it off, you've got the fact that there's a whole lobby pushing against it. So,
look, suburban moms are going to vote the way that The View tells them to vote.
Yes, absolutely.
They're not paying close attention to the details of this conflict. I mean, this is my crew. Trust me. What The View says, whatever the symbols on Facebook are,
it's The View or their one politically active friend on social
propaganda
media.
Yeah, and it's also, you have to say suburban moms are very conscious of social chic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in other words, of being acceptable to your.
They're still 13. They're still 13.
The whole progressive project in the United States nowadays, the whole progressive project is essentially just like luxury beliefs.
That's right.
These are all first world problems that people are having because our society is so successful. Even now, with like a downturn in the economy, we're in recession, even though the government doesn't want to admit it. But we're still a very successful society, a very wealthy society where we can have luxury beliefs or take time out to do activism and stuff like that.
I just want to say Pew Research has in 2018 11% of 18 to 29-year-olds were voters, and in 2022 it was 10% of 18 to 29-year-olds. So I'll find.
Wait. 10% of the votes they received came from 18 to 29-year-olds?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what she said.
Wow.
But you said 18 to 24.
Right, so...
I'll try and find it. That was just fascinating.
But
Just cut it in half. You're probably right.
No, but I think 18 to 29 is the good...
That is.
Yeah, that's the young demographic that's more likely to be pro-Palestine as opposed to pro-Israel. The older you get, the more it shifts. If they lose half that, they lose 5% of their votes, they can't win. That's a 2.5 swing in the general. Trump's already pulling up. Now, again, a year is an eternity in electoral politics.
And this is, I'll try and find 2020 and 2016, because this is obviously, a mid-cycle election.
Phil, you mentioned this idea of luxury beliefs. I think that's a perfect way of putting it. That summarizes a lot of the values of the Democratic Party today and just left-wing individuals, generally speaking. The idea that you have time to get worked up over whether someone's using your they-them pronouns when you're clearly a man or clearly a woman, because all of your basic needs are so readily met that you can meditate on all the ways that you consider yourself to be special and then be up in arms when other people don't acknowledge that. It's a very real problem. It's a very real problem. And one thing I've also noticed is even when you're not talking about people who have those specific values or view themselves in that way, I think once people have their needs met, and particularly once they become wealthy, and the wealthier they become, I have found the more of an inordinate, unhealthy emphasis they place on their reputation. And I think it gets worse. Oftentimes, the more money people have, it becomes more of a temptation. I'm not saying it's always the case. It's just something I've noticed, generally speaking. And so once your country becomes very affluent, I think this stuff really starts to seep in. It's the typical good times create weak men scenario.
You were going to say something?
Yeah. I think the other element of it is the reemergence of a kind of aristocratic sensibility. So the aristocratic sensibility is, I'm riding my horse, and here's a peasant, and he's saying something annoying, and my natural attitude is, shut up, peasant. You shouldn't be able to speak. Right? So there's an authoritarianism there which arises out of the idea that I am a superior human being and an inferior creature has deigned to challenge me. This is like unacceptable on principle, right? So I think that, because think about it, you could, if it is true that we have these luxury beliefs, you don't need a police state. You could let the Republicans do what they want. No reason to shut them down. No reason to put Dinesh in prison. No reason, because you got the media, you got education, you got Hollywood, you've got all the big megaphones of the culture. You should be able to beat Trump. But yet they're like, the peasants.
Yep.
The peasants are not listening to us.
That's exactly right.
We've got to censor them.
I think that's exactly right. And the last time I was on the show, I mentioned something similar, which is that the reason they have to resort to using the legal system is because people no longer trust the media. If they could enforce their hegemony just by saying the acceptable perspectives on television and having people believe them, they would not have locked you up. They would not be threatening and pursuing legal action against Donald Trump and the people surrounding him. They would just assassinate their character in the media. But that doesn't work anymore because nobody trusts the media, and for good reason. So now they actually have to find these legal solutions.
I just want to say, the Tufts estimates that 50% of 18 to 29-year-olds voted in 2020, and that's up 11 points from 2016 when they said 39% of 18 to 29-year-olds. So it's high. It's much higher during a presidential election year. I feel like that's worth noting.
Julie, do you think that what Seamus was saying, it's when they use the law, do you think that reinforces the message that they're trying to put out? Because I feel like it's a combination of what Seamus is saying, because I do think that's real. But I think that the reason that they went after you, Dinesh, and why they're going after January 6th is to kind of put an extra stamp of validity to what essentially amounts to bunk charges. Like, most of the stuff that people at January 6th are charged with, the vast majority of it is garbage. The vast majority of the political prosecutions that we see, the parents in Virginia that were prosecuted, the FBI looking at people, the IRS looking at conservatives, Dinesh here, obviously, these were all things that were essentially fabricated so that the government could use, or so that the government could use the force of government against the private sector. And so, as you point out, the media would be enough, but I feel like the use of the government is to kind of put a stamp on it, like, we've said this is the message, and if you get out of line, we will use the government to repair your opinion.
Repair it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Obama said at one point, he said something like, we've got all these outlets, but there's a whole group of Americans that we can't reach. And I think what he meant is the Americans who are like on Breitbart, they listen to, War Room and Tim Pool, and they read Dinesh's books. So I think the goal, if I think back to my case, what was their real goal? It wasn't incarceration. The real goal was to destroy my career.
Yeah. Message.
To sort of disable me, and people don't want me to speak, publishers don't want to publish my books. So I realized that early on, and I said to myself, at the end of the day, if I can come out of it and my career is bigger than it was before I went in, then I win. Mm-hmm. If I basically become somebody where I'm now begging to speak and nobody wants me to speak, then they win.
And you know what? The fact that you have had success after this is something that at least theoretically could have dissuaded them from trying the same tactic in the future. Unfortunately, I don't think it has as much. But if they were able to just totally destroy your career, I think they would have done this way more.
What's your take?
Between then and now?
I was actually talking to Bevelyn Beatty, who was in Police State. And she made a very valid point. She goes, Dinesh, you hired a $250,000 lawyer. You had Ben Brafman, one of the best lawyers in New York City. You had Megyn Kelly. You had Ted Cruz, who went to Donald Trump and asked Trump to pardon me. So she goes, you had resources available to you that January 6th defendants and moms at school board meetings and pro-life activists do not have. And I think we can see the ruthless way in which some of those people's lives have just been stamped down.
Mm-hmm. And it is a message. So, Phil, to your point, I mean, they are weaponizing statutes like obstruction of an official proceeding, 1512C2, which was passed after the Enron scandal, and it dealt with evidence tampering. Well, now it's been charged against more than 300 January 6 defendants. It's a felony count, and it's never been used in this way. And you have the D.C. Appellate Court, who a slim majority upheld the use of this 1512C2 against 300 plus January 6ers. It's one of the counts in Jack Smith's indictment against Donald Trump. But the weaponization of that, what they've done is use that now to criminalize political dissent. Yep. So it's moved away from its original intent, which everyone knows what it was, and now it can be used if you disrupt a proceeding in Congress or any federal government meeting. It won't just be Congress, it will be everywhere.
And it will be prosecuted selectively as well. It's not going to be.
Well, Jamal Bowman should have been charged. All of the protesters in the Cannon office building, the people who have disrupted the Senate Foreign Affairs, all of the Senate hearings.
All of the rioters during 2020.
Yeah.
The single biggest freak out I've seen in the last several days was when Donald Trump said, in effect, two can play at this game.
Right.
And he said, so keep it up, guys. But while you're winning, but if power changes hands, we can do it to you. And the hysteria over that. Trump is admitting that he's an authoritarian.
There are people.
He's going to do what we're doing. He's an authoritarian.
DOJ to go after his political foes.
There are people that already have campaign signs. There's someone from New Jersey that's running. I think he's a congressperson in New Jersey. He was talking about how Donald Trump is saying that he's going to make an authoritarian blah, 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 and he's got a tank in his ad and stuff. I put it up on my Twitter account using underneath the picture of Joe Biden when he had the red background and the Marines behind him. Because I wanted to draw the contrast. But there's already people that are using that exact talking point that you guys just pointed out. They're already using it. It's already in print.
Yeah.
Did you guys see that widespread story, raids and concentration camps? The guy in MSNBC said Trump's telling us he's going to build concentration camps.
Lincoln
and
which he really did not.
He said a clown with a flamethrower still has a flamethrower, and so we're working on that T-shirt right now. It's going to be Trump with flamethrower to the swamp.
Also, again, because Trump is basically saying two can play at that game. All they're doing is projecting here and telling you what they would like to do,
what they are doing.
Yeah,
they're telling you what they are doing now.
There's not a threat anymore. It's clearly happening all around us constantly now.
It's just okay when they do it, right? It's not okay when anyone else
We're
does.
living in the...
And I do think that if it keeps up, there will be a massive shift in the Republican base that will demand the same.
We're living...
Yes.
They'll get burned out. They will start to say, well, we want revenge, right?
Not only we want revenge, but we recognize that, I mean, it's if the Democrat is acting like the bully, right? Mm-hmm. Every time you see a kid, and the kid wants to be a nice guy, and he wants to make peace, and you bludgeon him, Well, then the kid gets 5 of his friends, and then they go, okay, well, let's ambush the bully, and kick him in the shins. Because what is the other way to stop this? Yeah. Right? Isn't it true that the passivity of the right is provoking the aggression of the left?
Yeah.
It goes unfettered. There's no check to them.
They are, again, they're totally impossible to pacify. Every single time you try to compromise with them or give them a victory, you're just encouraging them more. They're insatiable.
I've been saying this a bunch, and everybody that watches regularly has heard me say it. We are living in the logic of Herbert Marcuse. He wrote a paper called Repressive Tolerance in the 60s, and it essentially boils down to it's okay when the left does it, and the right must be censored, even at the level of thought. And that's the world that we live in now, and you see it all the time. The way that the law is applied to people with different political opinions, it is clear that it's being applied to conservatives and conservatives and people that are just outside of what is acceptable opinion, because you don't have to be particularly conservative. All you have to do is push back against the narrative.
We're going to go to Super Chats. So if you haven't already, would you kindly smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends, and head over to timcast.com to click join us, become a member, and watch the Infringed documentary by Lauren Southern. It's amazing, and I recommend you share it with your friends and family. And I will say this right now, we strongly encourage, if you've got a local pub or hangout spot, you can log in and you can play that for everyone in your neighborhood. If you want to do screenings, please do so. We think it's fun, we think it's entertaining, and we think it's important that this perspective on the importance of our gun rights and gun culture be shared with everybody. And that's how we're going to win that culture war. But for now, we will read your Super Chats. And of course, the first Super Chat we got is Clint Torres, who says, howdy, people. Tim, I used to think the worst part about Star Trek The Next Generation was Tasha Yar dying, but now I've been convinced it's Will Wheaton. We were just talking about that yesterday. Sorry, Will Wheaton just not. I feel bad for him because I feel like, not for who he is today, but back then he gets asked if he wants to play this role. It's supposed to be this super smart kid, and everyone hated the character, and it must suck to get sidelined like that. Anyway, Matthew Hammond says Tim proposed a beef between himself and Cassandra over Israel. May I recommend the names you call each other? Tim Fence Settler Pool and Cassandra Westbanks McDonald. Haha. Yeah, I tweeted that. I said, hey, Cassandra, we should have a fake beef over Israel to generate press attention. And people were like, are you implying that Ben and Candace are faking it? And I'm like, I'm implying it's generating a lot of attention for them. I don't know if they're faking it or not, but I was like, that's the joke, that I would be like, oh, Cassandra, how dare you? Ooh. And then, someone said something like, I am unwilling to call out Ben Shapiro for his obvious failures or whatever, because I'm more concerned with being friendly or friends with him. And I'm like, I barely know Ben Shapiro. We've interviewed him one time. I've talked to him a couple times. And it really just comes down to, I don't know or care enough about Israel to criticize Ben Shapiro for, I agree with a lot of what Candace is saying about America First, but I'm not going to be like, well, here's something I don't know all that much about, and I'm going to come at you, Ben. Or I'm going to be like, well, I don't know, I'd love to hear what
I think some people do that because they're pretending like they're doing the right thing, but it actually is for the engagement on Twitter. Not everybody, but I think that's sort of where the audience has gotten confused. It's not always genuine.
I think also that some of the imputation that sort of Ben is not concerned about America because he cares about Israel. I think that Ben genuinely believes that Israel is the outpost of Western civilization in an extremely hostile region, and that the attack on Israel is part of a larger attack on America and the West. I think he believes that sincerely, and for the most part, I agree with him.
Mike Cernovich had a great tweet, I just retweeted it, where he said something to the effect of, imagine if you see these people that care so deeply about Israel and this fervor, imagine if Americans had that same degree of fervor for America. And I'm like, I've been talking about Israel-Palestine derangement syndrome, where people just go to 11 instantly, and I'm like, that's a really great point. I would love it if people were had that fervor for the United States. Unfortunately, what do we get? It's foreign wars or it's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's also the case that in the case of Israel and in the case of Jews, they do have a weapon that is not available, for example, to whites, which is the anti-Semitic weapon. Because when the left goes, you're a settler, you can play back, you're an anti-Semite. Mm-hmm. But let's say someone comes and says, you're a white supremacist. You're
You say, I have black friends.
Exactly.
I had a black president.
Exactly.
What are you talking about?
I voted for Obama.
There you go. That's my point.
All right. Kalishnikov says, I purchased 10 of the black paraplegic Santas from Target. I want to.
Why would you do that?
Have you seen these?
How is he going to get down your chimney?
I'll buy one
I
for
don't
you.
understand.
No.
Target is selling white and black paraplegic Santa ornaments.
Oh.
So it's a black Santa Claus and a white Santa Claus, and they're in wheelchairs.
Oh.
And so people are like, this is getting a little absurd or whatever. My attitude has been like, the market shall provide. If people want to buy this, like, let them buy it. And I got to be honest, I want to buy a bunch of them. And I'm willing to bet Target is going to be like, wow, we're selling so many of these. People really love this stuff.
Look, Tim's got a point. Supply side economics. You didn't know that you wanted an iPhone until the iPhone came out.
I did
so,
not
you know.
I wanted black paraplegic
Right?
Santa
Are
until
you
they made it.
suggesting that the black paraplegic Santa is going to have the same effect on the economy that the iPhone did? It's
you know,
everyone's
we-
like, I
we
can't
can
live
hope.
without one. I
We can
didn't
hope.
realize I needed it, and now
We
I
can
can't
hope.
go
But
anywhere
what do you
without
think will
it.
happen to Santa next year? Like, does he get the cochlear
What's the
implant
upgrade?
next year?
What's the
Does
upgrade?
right? Does he like
the upgrade?
transition? I mean, where does this go?
I am going to look into a company that manufactures stuffed figurines or animals or whatever and see what we can come up with. And we are going to make the Woke Collection Christmas ornament series.
There is some niche Etsy shop that is like, I need to find their email immediately. You know, someone has been doing this for a while.
There's a bunch of Reddit posts where, like, I tweeted, WTF, how is this real? And it's funny because it does show the isolation the left lives in, because the response from all these comments where they were like, I thought Christians thought this. I thought the Bible said this. And I'm sitting here like, I'm not a Christian. Like, why are they assuming? Because they don't know anything about me.
They're probably wrong about what the Bible says, too.
Oh, for sure. And they're saying things like, haha, Tim Pool is so mad about it. Mad? I'm having a blast. I want to buy a bunch of them. They don't know anything about how I feel. I'm super excited for it.
If you want to really flummox them, what you do in all these situations is you attack them from the left. Because if you think about it, if you're a black paraplegic Santa, you have two claims to intersectionality. You're black, that's number one, and you're paraplegic, that's number two. But that still leaves 3 or 4
But you're saying
unaccounted.
you've
Oh,
got
so you're saying they
slaves.
should make an accompanying Mr. Claus?
Either that, or you create a group that wants to boycott the black paraplegic Santa on the grounds that he's not diverse enough. And then right away, Target is now they're going to have to get on a Zoom call.
They're going to make the Mr. Claus companion figurine.
No, look.
Poor Santa.
I'm legit. I want to buy a bunch of these, but I would rather do our own Timcast collection and have a variety of options, like maybe, veteran.
Bogus.
Well, sure, we could do a Bogus, but I mean, like, making semi-real and semi-fake ones, just going all across the board with it. Elves that have seen brutal war and combat and, PTSD triggered
PTSD
characters.
elves?
And, yeah,
The reindeer are having a rough time. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. It is interesting as a strategy for Target to get conservatives to break their boycott, right? Like, make a ridiculous item so they hate buy it.
Someone had to have known. I don't know. They are pretty tone deaf, though.
It's impossible to tell. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
it's
almost
true.
the genius behind it.
Poe's law.
Target's not looking to break the boycott anyways. They hired someone for they have an LGBT department apparently now. And
Which aisle is
I
that?
think they already had that.
I don't know, but the person they hired is definitely someone that conservatives would likely frown upon, considering the history there now.
Let's read some more. We got Jackie Octavia says, your conversation about homelessness kind of surprised me. It makes sense, though. I'm living out of my truck for work, super cheap. The conversation we were having, which has now come up again in Super Chats, is that many of these leftists seem to think that you can take a homeless person, put them in a house, and problem solved. However, the issue is that's technically the truth. However, that only applies to homeless people who are homeless by unfortunate circumstance and are desperately trying not to be. Whereas the reason you never encounter that is because if somebody loses their job and gets kicked out, they instantly go to a shelter and say, I need help. And within a week or two, they are placed somewhere and not homeless anymore. I love that. That's great for the nonprofits. But the people we see on the streets in San Francisco and Sacramento and Los Angeles and many other places, Chicago even, they are people who do not want to be in buildings. They want to be homeless. So there's no real solution to that except for, I guess, forceful removal or like blocking of the homeless.
I want to know when the nonprofit starts to get all of the millennials and Zoomers doing van life houses. They start being like, you guys technically qualify as homeless, we'll help you get a house. And then they look like they're doing a good job because those people would probably give it up easily.
I'm not your buddy guy says, Dinesh, you did an amazing job with Police State. And I got to say, even as a Canadian, I was moved by that ending. We are in dark times indeed.
So the ending he's talking about, and actually is thanks to Julie here. Julie in the movie talks about the fact that the January 6th prisoners sing the Star Spangled Banner at 9 p.m. in an act of defiance and patriotism. So at the closing of the movie, I say, in honor of the January 6th political prisoners and political prisoners around the world. This is actually, I say, and then we have a scene where you have one guy in a cell and he starts to sing, and then a second guy joins and a third guy joins into a kind of a resounding chorus, but there's a sadness to it. And I think that's what really moves people. It's the Star Spangled Banner rendered in a combination of triumph and mourning. Mm-hmm. And that's how the movie ends.
All right. Ian says, Shimcast is the best, not this Timcast BS.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Or check out. I cut my mic again. This is censorship. No, I did to myself.
Here's the thing. I don't just want you to compliment me. I want you to degrade my friends. Yeah. Every nice comment.
Graham in Media says, Crowder must be loving this, waiting for his show. Crowder is going to start his show with an ish-eating grin and one arm on the table, and he's going to be looking at the camera smiling. Something like that. That's what I predict. All right, here we go. The Dude Abides says, I like the Daily Wire, I like Ben, but I'm siding with Candace. A lot of Ben's content has been fanatical as of late with the current conflict, understandably. He shouldn't have snapped at Candace on social media. A lot of people I see on Twitter are saying Ben doesn't have the support group to pull him back a little bit because he's the big guy, he's the boss. He's got one of the biggest podcasts, he's the biggest conservative podcaster. I'm pretty sure his show is bigger than basically any other conservative podcast. So, that may be. But look, man, the dude didn't get where he is by being bad at what he does. I don't think this is going to be the biggest thing impacting the Daily Wire or Ben Shapiro. That's why when people are like, why won't you call out Ben? Or why aren't you telling Cassandra she can't say these things? And I'm like, dude, in 3 months, we're going to be talking about a new book that came out and was put in schools. America matters substantially more to me than what's going on in Israel, but I'll always pretty much be an anti-intervention and America first.
If you listen to Ben's show, it's not a surprise. His attitude towards this, it is completely predictable. He's always been pretty hawkish when it comes to Israel. So, I mean, if you don't like that, that's understandable, but it shouldn't come as a surprise to people that Ben's acting like this.
I want to skit. Serge, if this is your fault, you're fired. No, just kidding. It's me. I want to skit on what's happening in the Daily Wire HR department right now. What kind of mediation
Violence
they're trying to come out.
We don't want
some Zoom calls there. Yeah.
All right, let's grab some more super chats. What do we have here? What is this? Michael Beacon says, so crazy. DePap followed the state's Christmas list of groups and figures they hate, despite living in a house with BLM and Antifa signs all over it. How about that? And then he also got on the stand and described in great detail his conspiracy to go after other people who are completely unrelated to his crime, as if to implicate him further for some reason. We get it. All right, what do we got? Triton54 says, can we please get a cartoon where Candace interviews for a position with Timcast, the Young Turks, Shoe on Head, and Louder with Crowder?
Ooh, there might have to be a cartoon about this whole ordeal. So tomorrow's cartoon is going to be hilarious, and we have one planned for next week, too, for Thanksgiving. But if people are still talking about this, by the time we have to do another tune, I definitely want to try to figure out an angle for it.
Seamus and I were colluding on a Christmas one.
There's this idea that I had that I kind of pitched to Tim, and then he was coming up with ideas for me. We were riffing on it. It's super funny, but I don't want to spoil it.
Right, that's why I was whispering to Seamus during the show.
He was. We were like, we'll talk more about it after the show, but it's going to be super funny if we can do it.
That's when Hannah Claire yelled at us.
Yeah, Hannah Claire was.
Well, I'm just here to keep order here on Brimcast. No, I'm just kidding.
Excuse us?
Let's read some more. Ethan Helm says, Candace confidently but wrongly said Muslims can only live in one area of Jerusalem, so Israel doesn't seem like a very free place to her. I think this is the pseudo-intellectualism Ben is mad at, not so much about her questioning on U.S. involvement. No, I agree. I think, Candace has said a lot of things that are... basically what people are saying is that when she posts a Bible verse, we know what she's referring to when she said, blessed are the peacemakers. Right now, contextually, it sounds like she's basically saying ceasefire or something to that effect, for which Ben is like, okay, dude, I know what you're doing. It is what it is. It is what it is.
Interestingly, when I first saw that post, and admittedly, I haven't been following the blow by blow, I interpreted it completely differently. I actually interpreted that Candace was trying to mend fences with Ben. And that the blessed of the peacemakers are let's not let this get out of hand.
Yeah.
I took it that way, but I now see that the possibility of reading it in the AOC way, which was...
Wouldn't it be so brutal if Candace was actually trying to make a statement about not wanting to be mad with Ben? And that's actually a fair point. Perhaps what she was saying was she saw the clip from Ben who said it's disgraceful. And then she said, what am I supposed to say to Ben? And someone was like, nah, blessed are the peacemakers. It's like, I'm going to tweet blessed are the peacemakers. Thinking that she was basically saying, I will not get into a fight with you over this. And then he got into a fight with her over it.
Would have been fun. And then Shapiro tweeted back, 1 Timothy 2:12.
Which is?
Well, it was the verse
I know.
earlier.
I'd like you to recite
So
it.
women, basically, it's actually about women
Just
not
pull it up.
teaching in church.
But I don't need your whinging and explanations and pitter-patter. I'd like you to read it.
It's going to get the show taken down.
Seamus is like...
So it's 1 Timothy 2:12. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet.
That's in the Bible.
Well, the context of it is Paul is writing to Timothy at the church in Ephesus about practices in church, and this is basically something that means women are not supposed to be in the role of a cleric. They're not supposed to be teaching in church or giving homilies.
Seamus is doing a struggle session right now.
This is not a struggle. No, this is not a struggle session.
It's how Seamus told me in Catholicism to stop talking. That he wasn't going to take my great advice that he solicited, which doesn't make any sense.
I told you to hush in Catholic.
He texted me first, asked the question, then told me to stop.
I just want to be clear so as to not give scandal. The point is not to say women can never teach or never teach people about the gospel. It's to say they're not supposed to teach. They're not supposed to be priests. They're not supposed to give homilies.
This is the public-facing Seamus answer.
I'm just saying.
As soon as the cameras go off, it's a totally different thing.
We got a good super chat here from Paul Tascalos. He says, Daily Wire has proven Crowder was right. He broke the biggest story of the year, the Trans Manifesto, which Facebook, Instagram, YouTube censored. Under Daily Wire contract, Crowder would have been financially penalized for the best journalism of 2023. That is a very, very interesting point. Man, that was in January, whatever, when this stuff went down, and the contract he showed, or it was the terms sheet. It wasn't the full contract. It was basically like, are we going to agree to these things? Said that he would lose money if he got suspended or banned or anything like that, and that would mean that
he couldn't have done what he did.
He would have had to have come forward and say, okay, well, to be fair, he already lost money. By releasing this and getting these videos taken down, he's going to get hit all the same. But it would negatively impact his entire contract, which is probably more money contract-wise than straight-up advertising-wise, right? Mm-hmm. He can find ways to make up lost revenue in that regard, but if his contract is his contract and it penalizes him, there's no increase, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the economic model of the Daily Wire is to pay you very well for 5 years and to lock you into a pretty long duration, and then Moneyball style to increase the value of your brand in that time so that there's a huge financial premium. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's very smart business from their point of view.
And then when you leave, they've built your brand up.
They've built your brand up, and you can take it with you. Absolutely.
Right. It's reminiscent of what record labels do.
Yeah,
I mean, a record label takes a band that they think that's got something going, and they add money and promotion and advertising. The band goes out and however long the contract is, some are better, some are worse. But after a few records or whatever, if you survive as a band and become a viable entity, you can get off. You can decide to not sign another deal, and you've got a career that you've built. That the record label, your career would not be the same without the record label almost every time. Like, there are some bands that hit it off and do stuff without record label backing, but most of the time bands wouldn't get to the level that they get to without the record labels in the very beginning. So,
but how would you know about this? You failed musician?
20 years of losing is what it is.
Well, but it's a very, very different era these days.
Yeah.
And so one of the most difficult things is we want to do a bunch of projects. We go to someone and say, how would you like to, hey, we've seen your work, it's really good, would you like to do this job? And they go, why? Well, because we'll pay you money and you can do it. I don't need it. I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram, I'm already making money. I got a Patreon, I've got a subscribe, so I got my own website. And I'm like, fair point. That's absolutely it. Mm-hmm. There's a very prominent YouTuber I was talking to who said that he does all the work by himself for the most part, and his staff is mostly like administrative paperwork and stuff like that. And I said, wouldn't it be easier if you just hired like a camera operator or something? And he was like, man, the amount of money you have to pay to get someone good enough to do the job is insane, because you have to pay them more than they could make on their own by doing social media, which is then I'm going to lose money by doing it.
That's one of the things that I talked
to
a lot of.
It used to be that you had, and I think back just to my early career, when I was at AEI, the brand was AEI. Mm-hmm. The brand was National Review. So the individual value of a writer at the National Review was very low outside of that club. The key was to be in the club. But now the brand is the individual. And so as a result, you have individual brands with then a kind of ancillary staff that enables the individual to shine out front. It's very celebrity oriented.
This is why I'll give a shout out to Tenet Media. We're doing the Culture War podcast now officially at Tenet Friday mornings. And I don't want to speak too much about their business, and I think in time more will come out. But basically the general idea is bringing together a whole bunch of personalities, and it's effectively a massive cross-promotional independent network that I think is going to be really, really epic. Betty Johnson, Dave Rubin, me, Taylor Hansen, Lauren Southern, and a bunch of other people. Super excited. Matt Christensen, shout out.
We actually need a lot more of this because what happens, and a film is a good example of this, is that we're not big enough for the film to travel on its own. It needs allies. One reason I went to Dan Bongino, I mean, people go, well, you went to Dan Bongino because he's a former NYPD officer and he's a Secret Service agent. I go, yeah, but he also happens to have a massive following. And so teaming up with Bongino takes my following and takes Dan Bongino's following, and now we got a viable movie, whereas otherwise I'm traveling all on my own. So
right.
Combining forces is important.
So the thing with Tenet, and I'll just say they're with like Rubin and Benny Johnson, they're massive forces on their own, as is Timcast. And people are like, why would you do a show with a different network? Because when Benny puts out a documentary and we put out a Culture War, then the people who watch Culture War and don't know Benny will then see his documentary, and the people who watch his documentary but don't watch us will then see us. And our company still exists. It has created effectively like a supergroup band. So that's how I kind of thought about it. When you have, these big bands and then a bunch of different members form the Traveling Wilburys or something, I was like, I think this could be wildly beneficial for everybody involved. So when it came together, I was like, this is awesome.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I see right here, this is the formula for becoming bigger than Fox News. Because Fox News at one point was the pathway for every conservative book, and then when Fox News sort of went took a kind of curved road, everyone was left helpless, including us. I mean, our earlier films, we were massively promoted on Fox News, and then they decided because they're scared of election fraud, don't mention 2,000 Mules, and it now carries over to Police State. Not a single Fox show, not a single Fox host has mentioned the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Fox is scared of a lot of stuff. They're very selective about who.
Yeah, so it creates a pressing need to build an alternative empire that is bigger than Fox.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
And this may well be the recipe, or at least the start of the recipe to do it.
I've mentioned this on the show before, but it's almost as if at this point what's happened is CNN tells you what you're supposed to believe, and then Fox tells you what you're allowed to believe. So if you don't believe what CNN believes, you don't buy it all. Okay, well, there's this other limited category of things you can believe, but we don't love it. Then once you're outside of the Fox territory, now you're like a totally radical
really good
conspiracy theorist.
Are you familiar with NewsGuard?
I've heard of them, sure. The verification site.
Yeah,
right.
we use them. All of our articles, whenever we read a story, is NewsGuard certified. And the reason we do it is, despite having serious issues with them, is something fascinating happened when they were trying to rate Timcast.com and our news sources, and they said that one of the stories we published, a couple of them were fake news. And so, you know what I emailed them back? Here are NewsGuard certified sources that we used for the basis of this story. If your own certification is not good enough, then by what criteria can we determine whether or not something is true or false? And they immediately had to backtrack and say, okay, well, I guess it's true. And it was like a Hunter Biden laptop thing that many in the mainstream media were trying to claim was disinformation. And so what's happening now, they are being sued by Consortium News. Real Clear Politics just published this big article about what's going on. I believe right now it's relatively cursory, but I believe any organization that has ever in any way worked with, complied, or altered their news at the request of NewsGuard should be severed from any kind of public funding. NewsGuard should be not allowed to contract. So what happened is, according to this lawsuit, the Pentagon has actually contracted NewsGuard for verification services, which means you now have a government-funded entity which is determining what is true or false in the public sphere. Like we saw with the Election Integrity Partnership, this is crossing the line and violating the First Amendment. And I will clarify, Timcast has told NewsGuard, we will comply with your ethics standards for a good rating. And I said, sure, yeah, absolutely fine. I have no problem issuing corrections. However, NewsGuard told us because we ran a couple articles quoting Donald Trump, we were irresponsible and would receive a strike for it. And even if we corrected them, there was nothing so there was no correction. Our stories were fact-based. Donald Trump holds rally, says paragraph. He did. And they said, yeah, but what he said in there was not true. And I said, well, that's fine. We weren't reporting on what he said. We weren't reporting on the subject matter. We were reporting on his rally and his quote. And they said, because we didn't fact check him, we were irresponsible. And so then I said, okay, then we will include that fact check, and then we will do it moving forward. They said, we don't care. You're irresponsible. We're going to give you a strike. Meanwhile, Consortium News pointed out that with 20,000 articles, NewsGuard had no problem except for 6 articles and gave them a strike down to 49%. So I just want to say this right now. I'm hoping that every single news outlet that has been labeled by NewsGuard begins the process, or however we do it, of a class action lawsuit for widespread, massive First Amendment violations and defamation, libel, etc.
I mean, look at the extent of the police state thuggery involved, right? I mean, it's almost like in the old dictatorial regimes, it was really simple. In the Nazi regime, you have a minister of propaganda, Goebbels. Mm-hmm. He issues the press release, and everybody has to say the same thing. And if you don't, you're going to be arrested. Our police state, I mean, think about it. The censorship industry involves academia, the media. It involves the nonprofits, the digital platforms, innumerable agencies of the government, all operating in this kind of like an octopus with like 18 tentacles. Mm-hmm. So rooting it out becomes more difficult because you can't just get rid of Goebbels. You've got to sort of go into this thing and just like pull it apart.
Well, I think that's too why there was such intense blowback to any contradictory reporting about January 6th, because they really believed that no one was going to challenge that narrative, that everyone was going to fall in line. This was an insurrection. It should result in the end of Donald Trump and the entire MAGA movement. They really thought, and I mean, the corporate media still is going along with that. So whenever you post something or write something that exposes something that they're covering up or not reporting on, they are hysterical because they really thought after that day they would impeach him, they would have the committee, everyone, and a lot of Republicans did fall in line. Mm-hmm. And now their whole narrative is collapsing. And so they're really struggling to maintain it, keep it together. That's why they keep arresting people. They need to keep it in the headlines.
They try to save the essence. I mean, right before 2000 Mules, my last film, it was deafeningly asserted in every media outlet that the 2020 election was the most secure election in U.S. history, right? And then as I went out talking about that movie and raising simple questions like, well, if it was the most secure election in history, where's the comparison of the amount of fraud between 2020 and, let's say, 2016, 2012, 2008? Right. Show me that comparison that someone has done showing me that the 2020 election had the least amount of fraud. Just not only has that never been proven, it's never been, to my knowledge, attempted.
And they said, please stop talking. We said it was right.
What is it right? But then notice that after the film, that slogan has quietly dropped out of sight. Mm-hmm. They just don't use it anymore. It's like, okay, you got us on that one. We're not going to say it. We're not going to take it back. We're not going to apologize. We're just going to not use that one anymore. But we'll try to preserve the central idea that claims of election fraud are baseless. That's their favorite word. They're baseless.
Mm-hmm. Or not enough to overturn the election. Not enough to change the election. There was some, but not enough to change the election. The
Election Integrity Partnership, or whatever it was called, so we're now seeing that there was direct government involvement in trying to suppress opinions. They called me a super spreader of information, and my position has been exactly as you described. Bill Barr said there was fraud. I think people have pointed out a lot of instances of fraud, but I don't know how many of these lead to the actual, this election should have gone the other way. The most important thing is that a judge listens to the lawsuits from Donald Trump and his team, and they're adjudicated properly on the merits. That's always been my position. What I've always said is, it doesn't matter what you think happened or who should have won. Biden won. Why? He's in the White House. So if you think they played dirty, I agree with you. They played dirty. The shadow campaign, all that stuff that's been in the press. My position has always been like, well, here's a lawsuit. I wonder what the judge will say. For this, the government colluded with universities to silence my speech, lying about what I was saying. The mere thought that Donald Trump would simply ask the question in court and ask a judge to rule on the merits was so threatening to them. This is insane to learn this. The government, we had, who was it on the show last week? They said, you know that you're in these documents, right, Tim? And I know that they released a report that included my name, and I got smeared in the press by it all over the place. And I was shocked to see this list that came out, putting me in like the top 15 or whatever super spreaders of misinformation, because I'm like, but hold on. All of my sources are certified by NewsGuard. I never said Trump actually won the election, not once. the mere thought that you would be like, oh, okay, let's see Trump's argument. That was too much. You had to say in every way, Trump's wrong and he's lying. And if you didn't, the government came after you. But we'll wrap it up there. Smash the like button. Subscribe to this channel. We're gonna figure out how we're gonna navigate the riots that are going on outside. They're not that close.
Let's go.
I'm not gonna go. They're fighting cops. They're not that close, but you can become a member at timcast.com by clicking join us. Watch the Infringed documentary. No members only show tonight, and a lot of people are like, it's not that far to drive. We have about an hour to an hour and a half drive back, and then I got to be up at 7 in the morning again. So I'm sorry, guys. We wanted to come down
far.
here.
I'll say.
It's not that bad. It's just by the time I get home and go to bed, I've got to wake up at 7 in the morning. So it's like we better head back.
You have to cut somewhere in the week.
I want to do an after show, you know.
Well, we're gonna do what we got to do, but it's okay because Seamus is back and he's gonna be here tomorrow.
Stream one on your iPhone.
Yeah.
Put me on the spot.
We'll live stream out the window as we drive past the riots. But you can follow the show at Timcast IRL. You can follow me personally at Timcast everywhere. Dinesh, do you want to shout anything out?
Yeah, I'm Police State. PoliceStateFilm.net is the website. We're being blocked on Amazon and Walmart, so that's the place you can stream it to your big screen TV. You can buy DVDs. Very good for gifts. This is a movie that will shake you up, so I urge you to watch it.
Yes.
Julie, do you want to shout anything out?
I'm just going to back up what Dinesh said. Check out the movie because it is pretty mind-blowing.
Are you on X or anything? Can people follow you guys?
Yes, I'm on X, Twitter, Julie_Kelly2. My Substack Declassified with Julie Kelly. All my reporting on January 6th. And my book on January 6th.
I just do think it's funny that everyone says I'm on X now because of Elon Musk.
Twix.
I'm on X, baby. How does that
what it
feel?
is?
It's still weird.
I don't like it.
I still say Twitter. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
maybe
I feel
I'm a
like I go
boomer.
back and forth.
Well, X doesn't really have a verb, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
still say I tweeted it out.
Yeah, you
Posted
tweeted
on
I posted,
X.
I X'd.
I X'd
Well, but
on
you
X.
guys know what it means to be on X.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it just occurred to me you can't really say I X'd
Oh,
because
I
it
see
kind
what
of sounds like I.
Sounds
I'm
terrible.
on X.
Yeah, or it's like
You know, I got to mention. I was skateboarding earlier with Taylor Silverman, and she was practicing a trick, and I said, if I explained what you were doing on social media, I'd get banned because of the terminology used by skateboarders. No joke. So the same word you would use to describe the transmission of a car, a slang term, which you can't say on social media because it's a slur, is a term used in skateboarding. So skateboarders bust fat lines, or they do fat lines, right? So if you were to lay out the full terminology from a skateboarder, you are banned so fast. So anyway, everyone else, shout your stuff out.
My name's Seamus Coughlin. I have a YouTube channel called Freedom Tunes. We do animated cartoons and political satire. We have one coming out tomorrow, which I think is going to be really funny. So I'd like to ask you guys to go over to Freedom Tunes on YouTube. You can also find us at freedomtunes.com. But go over to the YouTube channel, subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you haven't seen it before, check out some of our videos. I think you'll enjoy them.
I'm Hannah Claire Brimlow. I'm a writer for Timcast.com. I really thank all of you guys who support our work. I will. Serge is fired. I was just about to say thank you to Serge and the rest of the tech team that set all this up, made it happen. It's been so fun to be here. If you want to, and you definitely should, you should follow at Timcast News on whatever the social media platforms are called. If you want to follow me personally, I'm on Instagram at hannahclaire.b. I'm on whatever the other one's called at HC Brimlow. And yeah, just thank you guys so much. Thank you both for being here. And of course, thanks to Phil.
I am Phil That Remains on Twix. I am Phil That Remains Official on Instagram. The band is All That Remains. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Pandora, YouTube, you know, the internet.
All right, everybody, thanks for hanging out. It was a blast coming to D.C., hanging out at the Heritage Foundation with Dinesh doing his screening of Police State. And we will be back tomorrow with our members-only segment, so watch Infringed in the meantime, and we'll see you all tomorrow.